Tonight, let us venture together into a journey that is gentle, mist-shrouded, and deeply resonant, a place where each tiny stitch, guided by moonlight, can awaken lessons in meditation, compassion, and impermanence. Imagine yourself standing before an ancient monastery on a hillside, where the temple bell's echo mingles with the wind rustling through 100-year-old pine trees. In this place, there are no sounds of traffic, no electric lights, and none of the usual haste of modern life, only the soft fall of footsteps, the scent of decaying wood and yellowed brick walls, faded by centuries of wind and mist. So, before you allow your body to relax and your mind to drift into stillness, take a small moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you truly appreciate the gentle, simple things I share here. And please, don't forget to leave a comment telling me where you're listening to this story from and what time it is. I love knowing how you are connecting with me through these peaceful late nights. Now, dim your lights. Listen to the soothing sounds in the background, and let us begin tonight's journey, where each tautly pulled thread serves not just to join fabric, but to connect mind and nature, body and wisdom, you and your own original face. You begin with a strange dream. In it, you walk through a long corridor, thick with incense smoke, where brick walls are cracked and decaying wooden doors open illogically. You hear even rhythmic breathing, whose you cannot tell, emanating from the depths of your being. As you pass through a hingeless door, a dim blue light shines from a small wooden box. Inside is a needle. You awaken the instant your fingertip touches it. The sensation lingers on your hand, something cool, slender, and so sharp it makes you shiver. Though there isn't a breath of wind in the room, you dress, slip on your sandals, and leave your room as if someone has called your name, a call you cannot resist. Not with a voice, but with a very real, gentle pull from within your heart. The monastery lies silent beneath the moonlight. The towering pine trees seem to whisper sutras, while the courtyard, scattered with pebbles and white sand, reflects the soft light. You don't know where you are going, but your feet seem to know the way. The path behind the meditation hall leads down to a small house nestled at the foot of the hill. The tiled roof is faded and moss-covered, the whitewashed walls are peeling, and the wooden door is ancient. There are no lights, but you see the moonlight casting a thin, thread-like sliver of brightness that slides across the window frame. Stepping inside, you sense a presence. The air here is unique, thick as some nameless incense. A blend of old fabric, dried tea, and ink that is cracked with time. Everything is silent, yet not lifeless. It is alive, it breathes, but in its own way, very. Zen, the tailor, sits there. He doesn't look at you immediately. His head is bowed, his hands still deftly guiding the needle through dark brown fabric. Moonlight illuminates his thin back, his calloused hands. Each stitch has its own rhythm, its own pause, its own breath. You stand very still for a long time until he sets his needle down and turns. No greeting, no surprise, no questions, just a gaze that contains everything. You take the needle from your pocket, he takes it, holds it up to the moonlight, observes it for a long moment, then nods. That nod is not acknowledgement nor welcome. It is like an invisible seal confirming, "Ah, so you have arrived? You stay." No one tells you to, but you have no intention of leaving. He hands you a spool of thread, then continues sewing, and you, too, begin. Somehow your hands knowing how to thread the needle. The fabric on the table is an old Kasaya robe, frayed and torn at the sleeve's edge. You are tasked with mending the broken stitches. A simple job, but you quickly realize the problem isn't technique, it's the mind. At first, you are impatient. Trying to finish quickly, you pull too hard, the thread breaks, you rethread it, the needle goes awry, pricks your finger, a little blood seeps out, but the tailor just looks at you without a word. After several failures, you start to feel frustrated. Why is such a simple task so difficult? But then you remember a Zen master's teaching: in every action, if the mind is not present, it is merely old karma repeating itself. You take a deep breath. Sit up straight again. Look at the seam. Don't think about the result. Don't think about being observed. Only hand, needle, and fabric. Each stitch slows down. Each movement becomes neater. No more soft groans from fabric pulled too tight. Only the very quiet sound of thread gliding through. When you look up, he has poured you a cup of tea. You accept it. The tea is cool, but it smells of dried lotus. He says nothing, but you understand it's an acknowledgement, not for the finished product, but for your presence all night. The two of you sit in silence, only the sound of night insects, the needle-piercing fabric, and occasionally the sound of the moon drifting across the roof tiles. You don't remember when you left that room. You only know that when you returned to your bed, your heart felt lighter. Sleep came faster than ever before. No dreams, no attachments. As you fold your blanket, you see the small needle lying on your pillow. No one put it there. But you know last night you stepped onto the path of sewing robes and also the path of mending yourself. You are awake, not because of the bell signaling the third watch or the chirping of forest birds behind the mountain, but because there's an unusual peace within you, a kind of stillness not born from rest, but from something deeper, as if you've just passed through a long night, not for sleeping, but for returning. A cool early breeze wafts in through the slightly open window. The pale light of dawn shines through the old pine trees, casting shadows of their roots like ancient ink strokes on the monastery's brick courtyard. The scent of morning dew mixed with incense from the meditation hall drifts in, creating a sensation you can't describe with words, only feel with your breath. You step out into the courtyard without breakfast, without tea. Your feet automatically lead you back to the small house from last night, where the tailor is already sitting as if he never left. He glances up at you, then bows his head again to his work. No good morning, no did you sleep well, but you don't feel any lack. In that gaze, in that very slight nod, everything that needed to be said had already been said. You sit down beside him. On the table is a new piece of fabric, a grayish blue, coarser than before. He doesn't tell you what to do, but somehow you know very clearly you will cut the fabric. This is no simple task. The fabric is a blessed offering donated from a small temple in the valley. According to ritual, before cutting, the tailor must pause to meditate, to observe their own mind, because each cut of the scissors will be a new lifeline. Each piece of fabric will then embrace a practitioner's body in direct contact with their skin, their breath, their sweat, and also the illusions that need to be transformed. You look at the fabric, take a deep breath, your hand holds the scissors, but you don't rush to cut. At this moment, you recall a verse from Zen: the mind is like a skilled artist, capable of painting the 5 aggregates. All phenomena in the world arise from the mind. Loosely understood, the mind is like a skilled artisan, able to depict all 5 skandhas. All things in the world are born from the mind. You think to yourself, if my mind is restless, the scissors will cut crookedly. If my mind is judgmental, I will cut not a monk's robe, but a mask of arrogance. And so, you put the scissors down, close your eyes, sit still. You don't know how much time has passed, only that when you open your eyes, the sun is shining on your shoulder, your hand touches the scissors, and in that moment, there is no "who am I?" no "what am I doing?" only a pair of scissors gliding gently through the fabric, no sound, no excess force, Everything seems guided by the fabric itself. You finish cutting and look up. The tailor is watching you, his eyes sparkling. Not because you did well, but because you didn't do, you were simply present. He hands you a small brush pen and a pot of black ink. You are surprised. The fabric is cut. You've learned to sew. So, what's the brush for? He places his hand on his chest, then points to the fabric. You understand, you will write your mind on it, and so you write not with words, not with poetry, but with strokes, with the slight tremor of your wrist, with the unevenness of the ink line, with your very presence at that moment. In Zen, there is a principle: no reliance on words and scriptures, a special transmission outside the teachings, directly pointing to the human mind, seeing one's nature and attaining Buddhahood. No need for words, no need for scriptures. Just look directly into your own mind, and you can see your Buddha nature. And in that instant, you see those clumsy lines are not mistakes. They are you revealing yourself bit by bit. The afternoon passes slowly, the sun slants through the eaves, creating streaks of golden light like silk threads. You and the tailor say nothing to each other, yet you hear each other very clearly. You return. This time, he hands you a spool of white thread, very rare. In the tradition of this monastery, white thread is not used casually. It symbolizes emptiness, the spirit of non-abiding, no attachment, no craving. You hold it in your hand, your heart light. At that moment, you realize it is whiteness, colorless, that allows all colors to arise. Just as a mind free of thought is the foundation for all meritorious deeds, you begin to sew the collar of the robe with white thread. Each stitch recalls the ancient story of Bodhidharma crossing the sea to China, solely to transmit the mind seal. He carried no books, no doctrines, only silence. You are like that too. No one teaches you with words, but every movement, every pause, every glance from the tailor is a living sermon on teaching without words, teaching by example. By the time you finish the collar, it is late outside. The insects hum like a steady rhythm of a wooden fish drum. The scent of incense from the meditation hall drifts in again, and as you cut the final thread, a strange feeling arises, as if you've just sewn up a small tear in your own heart. You look up. The tailor is no longer there. Only the flickering oil lamp and the shadow of the robe you are sewing stretching long on the wall. And you understand you are not just learning to sew a robe, you are learning to mend the very fabric of your being, torn by greed, anger, and ignorance over so many years. You exhale very slowly, and in that breath, there is a great letting go, but gentle, like smoothing out a tangled thread. You wake later than usual, not because you are tired, but because your body has entered a state of stillness deeper than any night's rest before. When you open your eyes, the sun has risen above the pine ridge, casting a quiet golden light into the small room. Perhaps for the first time in your life, you don't feel pulled by time. Everything within you seems rearranged. No rushing, no bustling. Your mind no longer leaps from thought to thought like monkeys, swinging from branch to branch. Instead, it stands still, like the surface of a lake on an early morning, unrippled by wind. As you wash your face by the stone well behind the main hall, you see yourself in the water and notice something strange. Your facial features seem different, not older, not younger, but settled. You see a gentler gaze, less sharp, less tinged with the desire to become. You smile faintly, and the early wind carries that smile into space. The morning in the monastery begins with chanting. You sit among the long rows of monks, holding your copy of the Dhammapada, but your heart is still in the sewing room from last night. When you chant the verse, Mind precedes all mental states. Mind is their chief. They are all mind-wrought. If with a pure mind a person speaks or acts, happiness follows him like his never-departing shadow. You suddenly feel those words are no longer dead text. They are alive. They are telling your story about every stitch you've made, about the old tailor's gaze, about the brown robe lying on the old wooden table. You are no longer just chanting. Your lips still move, but your mind is chanting from the very needles you push through fabric. The scriptures are no longer in books. They are woven into every thread of the robe. After the session, instead of having tea with the monks, you silently return to the small house at the foot of the hill. The tailor is still there, but this time, no needle, no fabric, no thread. Before him is a large wooden bowl containing a dark dye, like black ink. He doesn't look at you, just waves his hand gently as if inviting you into the world of color. You kneel beside him. He stirs the water slowly with a large wooden spoon. The pungent smell of dye rises, but it's not unpleasant. On the contrary, it lightens your mind, as if in that steam there's a medicine to dispel illusions. He dips his hand into the basin, lifts out a freshly soaked piece of fabric. The black color is uneven, dark in places, mottled in others, but it's this very imperfection that makes it realer. You look at it for a while, then unconsciously ask, why not dye it evenly? For the first time, he answers with words, because a person's mind is not even, you are silent, he continues, light as a breath of wind. Every piece of fabric has its karma. Some parts have been stretched, others folded. When they enter the water, they reveal everything. Like a person in adversity, you sit stunned. The lesson comes swiftly and deeply, like a needle piercing your heart. For so long, you've tried to control everything, every stitch, every movement, every thought. You wanted everything even colored, straight-lined, up to standard. But you never asked, is my own mind even straight and up to standard? The old tailor silently hands you another piece of undyed fabric. He points to the basin, then gestures, do it yourself. You take the fabric, hesitantly place it in the solution. At first, your hand trembles. But then, you relax, let the fabric sink on its own, absorb the dye on its own. No forcing, no stirring, no expecting results. When you lift the fabric out, something strange has happened. The colors are uneven, but naturally harmonious. There are pale streaks like clouds, interspersed with dark patches like mountain rocks. Looking at it, you don't see a product, you see a path of practice. It's the path you yourself are walking, sometimes rising, sometimes sinking, with stains, with bright areas. But no part is superfluous, no part is wrong. Every part has a reason to exist. The afternoon passes like this, like a gentle stream flowing over rocks without a sound. As the sun sets, you hang the dyed fabrics on bamboo poles. They sway gently in the twilight, looking like prayer flags in the Himalayas. Each piece of fabric a wordless mantra. You turn to look at the tailor. He has stood up. In his hand is an old Kasaya robe, faded with time. He says nothing, just hands it to you, then walks out towards the meditation hall. You remain holding the robe, feeling as if you've just received an invisible responsibility not just to repair material, but a form of mending the heart for yourself and for all the generations who have worn that robe. You sit down at the table. The moon has risen. The lamp is not yet lit, but the light seems sufficient for you to see every tear, every frayed spot very clearly about. And you know, each stitch from now on is no longer merely a physical act. It will be each step on the path to enlightenment. You inhale deeply and begin to sew. You sit there, unaware of how time is passing. Your hands work deftly. yet without fatigue. Each time you thread the needle through the old fabric, you feel as if you are tracing a thread of time, a delicate vein connecting past and present. The Kasaya robe before you is not an inanimate object. You feel its presence keenly, like an experienced old friend. The creases at the collar, the tear at the elbow, the discolored patches from sweat and sun, all tell a story of, not in words, but very real. You recall a story a senior monk once told. This robe belonged to a monk who left the monastery 30 years ago. He left no letter, no warning, just the robe folded neatly on his table, and departed on a bright moonlit night. Some said he went into the mountains for a solitary retreat. Others believed he had attained enlightenment and left the worldly realm. No one knew for sure. But now, his robe is in your hands, and your hands will sew up the torn parts, not just materially, but also a deep connection to a journey bygone. You sew with such care, as if each stitch is a silent prayer, and strangely, your mind grows calmer and calmer. No more thoughts of right or wrong, skilled or clumsy. Only a very soft, very quiet flow remains. You begin to realize something profound in life. There are so many things we try to fix according to our own will. We mend relationships, misunderstandings, mistakes, with reason, with expectations, with ego. But some tears don't need to be covered up. They need to be understood, touched with compassion, not with the needle of perfection. Zen calls this knowing without knowing, knowing without needing to grasp, seeing without needing to control. You are practicing this with every stitch. You hear very light footsteps outside in the courtyard. The tailor returns. In his hand is a pot of hot tea. He doesn't enter, just places the teapot on the threshold, then sits there, watching you through the open window. No one speaks. Only the steam from the tea rises, mingling with the moonlight, creating an ethereal atmosphere like mountain mist. You put your needle down, pour tea, take a small sip. The tea is slightly bitter, but warm. It feels as though your taste buds and your mind are awakened simultaneously. He looks at you, speaking for the first time in hours. Well, have you finished mending it? You nod. He smiles, as light as mist. Mending robes is easy. Mending the mind is hard. You look at the now mended robe on the table, but you know his words are not criticism. They are an invitation to look deeper into yourself. He continues, some tears cannot be seen, but they will reveal themselves in how you sew, how you look, how you are silent. You put your teacup down. At that moment, you suddenly realize he is not just a tailor. He is a Zen master, someone who has lived fully with every piece of fabric, every needle, every breath, until life itself became a thread connecting countless lifetimes. You bow your head, not out of reverence, but out of gratitude, because he didn't teach you with words, didn't force you to follow a mold. He just sat there, like a mirror, allowing you to see yourself in every action. The night wind begins to blow stronger through the window, making the robe quiver lightly as if wanting to fly away. You hold it, smooth it out, then fold it neatly. He stands up, enters the room, takes out a small wooden box and hands it to you. Inside is a new set of needles and thread, gleaming, neat as if untouched. Keep it. From now on, you will sew many more robes. You take the box, a warmth food tad signing in your heart, not pride, but readiness. You understand that your path is not that of a tailor, nor that of an ordinary Zen student. You are walking a very fine line between doing and non-doing, between action and letting go, and you will continue to sew, but not just to make robes. but to keep your mind still in every stitch, as the ancients said, all Dharma gates take non-doing as their substance. All paths of cultivation take non-attainment as their aim. You leave the room. The moon still hangs high, but its color has faded. In your hand is the box of needles and thread. In your heart is a new consciousness, lighter, quieter, and spacious enough to listen to every falling dewdrop. You don't know how many more robes you will sew in your life, but you know one thing for sure: every robe, from now on, will be a silent sutra you write with needle and thread, with breath and with wordless love. When you return to your room, the camellia blossoms in front of the veranda have begun to open, dewdrops clinging to their delicate petals, sparkling like crystals in the nascent sunlight. You sit down on the wooden step, place the box of needles and thread on your lap, open it, and gaze at its contents as if they were treasures. Nothing inside is overly special: a few spools of thread, several needles, a small pair of scissors, and a piece of lining fabric. But as you look at them, you no longer see objects. You see companions, silent helpers guiding you to listen to yourself, inanimate things imbued with the soul of practice. A strange sensation spreads through you, not joy nor sadness, just a deep state, almost unnameable. In Zen, this state is sometimes called wuxin no mind, unattached, unresponsive, ungrasping, yet not at all cold or indifferent. It is a no mind that is still full of compassion. After the morning service, you are summoned to the main hall for a new task. The abbot, an elderly monk of few words, simply looks you up and down, then nods silently. He hands you a coarse cloth bag. Inside is an old worn kasaya, heavy with the scent of dampness and time. A young monk from afar is coming here for a 3-month retreat, he says softly. No, we will give him this robe, but it needs some mending. You take the bag, bowing deeply. And in that moment, you know this is no longer about mending a robe. This is a transmission. When you bring the kasaya back to the small house at the foot of the hill, the tailor is already there, as if he knew you were coming. He glances over it, without questions, without shaking his head, without praise or criticism. Then he opens a cupboard and takes out a new roll of fabric, a burnt earth color, thicker than usual, with a very faint scent of dried grass. You are surprised, aren't we mending the old robe? He replies, some things cannot be mended, but they can be continued. His words leave you standing still for a long moment. Yes, some things are torn to their very root. They cannot be sewn, cannot be patched. But one can still take what remains and weave something new, like using the ashes of a dry branch to kindle another fire. You and he begin to cut the fabric, but you are the one leading. The tailor merely observes. He doesn't correct your mistakes, doesn't intervene, just watches you as one watches a seedling begin to grow. An ancient verse echoes in your mind from mindfulness. Precepts arise, from precepts concentration, from concentration wisdom, from wisdom liberation. You are practicing precepts in every cut of the scissors, concentration in every stitch, and wisdom in every moment of listening. Each simple action suddenly becomes a ritual. Not a ritual of form, but of wakefulness. You sew continuously for 4 hours without a break. No fatigue, no distraction, no feeling of working, only even breaths. The moonlight outside the veranda, and the rhythm of the needle through fabric like the breath of heaven and earth. When you finish sewing the last seam, the tailor places a cup of tea beside you. You drink slowly, feeling the fragrance spread on your tongue, flowing down into your chest like warm water through a moss-filled river. The tea is more bitter, yet you find it more delicious. Why is the tea more bitter, you ask? He looks at you and replies softly, because you have become quieter. You understand the bitterness hasn't changed. The one who changed is you. And just like that, things that seem difficult, bitter, if seen with a different mind, become profound lessons. You step out onto the veranda, look up at the sky. The moon is waning, smaller and paler, but you no longer need light from the outside. The light now comes from within. A light that doesn't sparkle, isn't brilliant, but is as enduring as a small match smoldering in a winter's night. You turn back, look at the newly sewn kasaya hanging neatly on a bamboo hook. You don't know who will wear it, what kind of person the young monk is, what his habits are, what his temperament is like, but it doesn't matter. What matters is that you have placed your entire presence into every needle, every layer of fabric, every breath, and that is enough. You fold your hands before your chest, bow your head slightly, not before a person, not before a robe, but before your own mind, which is gradually becoming quiet, and you know you will sleep very deeply again. You begin a truly different morning, not because the scenery has changed, but because you yourself are changing. It seems as if every bird's song, every footstep on the stone courtyard, every sip of tea carries a layer of meaning you couldn't reach before. Stillness is no longer a physical silence. It is a deep state within the mind, like the surface of a lake when the wind has died down. Everything still happens, leaves still fall, bells still ring, the scent of incense still drifts on the wind, but you are no longer pulled along by them. You simply register, like a mirror that retains no image. You bring the sewn kasaya to the main hall before the midday meal. The abbot takes it, lightly touches the fabric, then says nothing more than a nod. But you understand it is acceptance, not of a product, but of a mind that has ripened. You return to the sewing house out of habit, but the tailor is not there. The room is empty, the door ajar, as if someone had just left not long ago. You sit down on the wooden stool, your hand touching the old spools of thread, your heart suddenly feeling light yet empty. You are not worried nor confused, just feeling an absence. He returns, carrying nothing but a bundle of fabric scraps, all colors, all textures, silk, canvas, linen, hemp. He places the bundle on the table and sits opposite you. His eyes are deeper, his gaze no longer like someone teaching you, but inviting you to step into an even deeper layer of the path. You ask softly, "These scraps, what are they for?" He doesn't answer immediately, just patiently spreads out each piece. Some are tattered, some scorched, some discolored by water, some previously sewn and then unpicked. Finally, he speaks. They are the remnants of many past robes. Each piece is a story. Now it's time for you to learn to piece them together. You look at them, feeling an undeniable pressure. How can these small, mismatched pieces, different colors, materials, sizes create something cohesive? You say, "I'm afraid I'll create something ugly." He looks at you, smiling. What is not pleasing to the eye is not necessarily unpleasing to the way. His words cut straight through your perfectionism like scissors. He continues, "Sew from imperfection itself. Let those bumps and misalignments teach you about tolerance." You begin, selecting each piece of fabric, matching each thread, weighing each layer. At first you feel flustered. The seams don't match. The fabric is too thick, too thin. The colors clash. But you remember his words, don't force everything to fit. Let them tell their own story. And gradually something strange happens. The fabric pieces begin to fit in their own way. Not according to any standard, but with an underlying harmony like dissonant musical notes that still blend into a wondrous symphony. You sit through the night with that patchwork robe, and you no longer think about making a product. You are sitting with the past. You are sewing together the broken pieces of human lives' failures, mistakes, hurts. But instead of discarding them, you piece them together with the thread of patience. In Zen, there's a concept called afflictions are enlightenment. The very things that cause us suffering, if seen deeply, are the path to liberation. The robe you sew is not perfect, but you know it is the most honest robe you have ever made. When you show the robe to the old tailor, he says nothing, just stands looking at it for a long time, then nods, so lightly you're not sure if you saw it. Then he takes a wooden mirror from a drawer, not bright, not reflecting clearly, but he hands it to you and says, "Try it on yourself." You hesitate. This robe is patchy, clumsy, but you comply. When you put it on, you feel your body enveloped not by fabric, but by forgiveness. Each mended tear is like an old wound on your own skin, and you understand you have begun to learn to love the imperfect parts of yourself. When you look up, the tailor is looking at you as if seeing someone truly return for the first time. Summer arrived, the sun no longer gentle. Midday light slanted through the roof tiles, casting shimmering shadows on the dark brown earthen floor, making the small sewing room warmer, like a kiln where awakening was slowly ripening. You still often sat there beside the old tailor, needle in hand, eyes following each thread through the faded fabric, but he wasn't beside you. On the table, a large cloth lay draped, bulging underneath as if concealing something. You looked around, he was nowhere to be seen. Only a thin piece of paper, tucked under a small stone on the table, bore familiar rounded black ink strokes. Brief yet resonant sew a robe flap from within silence. No explanation, no instructions, no indication of color, material, or shape. Just a simple sentence, but it seemed to touch the deepest part of your mind. As you sat down, your hand unconsciously removed the covering cloth. Beneath it was a robe with one flap missing, not yet sewn to the main body. The fabric was light, with a subtle pattern and a faint scent of herbs. Perhaps this was part of a ceremonial kasaya, the kind worn only on major holidays, or when prostrating before a Buddha statue. You placed your hand on the fabric, closed your eyes, and at that very moment, you felt something strange, not sanctity, not fear, but a stillness so profound it was complete, not a sound, not a thought, as if all the air had just been drawn out of the space, leaving you alone to face your own breath. So a robe flap from within silence. You inhaled without rushing, exhaled without forcing. Your hands began to move, but you weren't sewing to complete a robe. No more ideas of must be beautiful, must be worthy, must fit perfectly. You simply let the needle follow the rhythm of your heart, one beat, one stitch, one breath. You suddenly remembered a Zen verse, neither arising nor ceasing, neither defiled nor pure, neither increasing nor decreasing. You had once thought it was theory, distant philosophy. But amidst those silent stitches, you suddenly understood all struggle dissolves when you no longer demand results, when you just do, without letting the ego stand between the action and the object. By the time you finished the flap, the sun had set, but you hadn't noticed time passing, only an encompassing stillness, as if the newly sewn robe had become a part of your body, or vice versa. You hung the robe on the rack, stepped back, bowed your head, not for anyone to see, but within you, something had ended or begun, or both, which, in truth, were not so different. You didn't go to the sewing room anymore. You went to the small stream behind the monastery. Sitting on a familiar flat rock, you dangled your feet in the water, listening to the gurgling stream, the leaves falling as softly as a wordless sutra. You looked at the moon. It wasn't full, but you didn't wish it to be, because you understood a waning moon is still the moon. An unsewn robe flap is still a robe. An unenlightened person already holds the seed of Buddha nature within. You didn't return to your room. You slept right there on the rock by the stream, without a blanket, without a pillow, without fear. Only the gentle wind through your hair and the sound of insects like a chorus from a distant past you once heard in some other lifetime. In your dream, you saw the tailor standing in the room, holding a large wooden needle, sewing not fabric, but the sky, each stitch pinning stars to the Milky Way, each thread connecting heaven and earth, connecting the human heart to the universe. And you understood you were no longer a student. You had become a part of that great robe. You awoke before it was fully light. Mist covered the water's surface, making the stream like a blurred mirror, no longer reflecting clear forms, but only retaining hazy outlines, like memories dissolving in a dream. You didn't stand up immediately, just sat there, hugging your knees, feeling the earth beneath your feet still holding the night's chill. No one called you, there was no bell, no one reminded you it was time for practice, and you didn't feel the need. You had begun to understand something in Zen. On time is not as important as right mind. A person can wake up early, follow the schedule perfectly, sit in the correct posture, chant with the right intonation, and still have a mind as restless as a monkey swinging from branches. Meanwhile, someone sitting quietly by a stream, not chanting, not meditating, doing nothing at all, might be living in true wakefulness. You washed your face with stream water, then walked towards the sewing room, where the old tailor was sitting, drinking tea. No one was surprised. No questions like, "Where were you last night?" He just poured you a cup of tea, then silently pushed it towards you. You took it, sipped a little. The tea tasted different, clearer, less bitter, but also deeper, as if you had shed a thick layer of yourself and begun to touch a more essential part. He placed a piece of pure white fabric on the table with no pattern, no markings. You will sew something that no one will wear. You frowned. No one will wear it. Then what for, he didn't explain, just pushed towards you a stack of old papers with scattered notes on dimensions, hemlines, proportions, but no overall design. You sat down, placed your hand on the fabric, then looked out the window. A pine branch had just shed its needles. One needle twirled many times in the air before landing, like a final farewell. Suddenly, you understood this robe was not for wearing, but for offering. A ceremonial robe, a Dharma robe, or a robe to offer to a Buddha statue. No one would wear it, yet it had to be sewn with all reverence. No specific wearer, but the recipient was the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, and you began. Each needle was threaded not with effort, but with the ritual of the mind. You didn't feel like you were making anything. You were cultivating aspiration, truly giving rise to a new stream of consciousness, where every action carried the spirit of offering without seeking reward. In Buddhism, there is a term called formless giving, that is, to give without seeing oneself as the giver, without seeing anyone as the receiver, and without clinging to the gift. What you were doing was practicing that, but with thread and fabric instead of words. Mid-session, you dropped a spool of thread. It rolled under the table, getting caught in a small crack in the earth. You reached down to pick it up, accidentally touching something cold and sharp. Pulling it out, you found an old iron scissors, its blades rusted, its handle cracked. You held it up, looking at him. He smiled faintly. "The first pair of scissors I used when I was still a novice." You looked at it, then instinctively asked, "Why do you still keep it?" He replied slowly, "Not to use, but to remember." You held the scissors in your hand, feeling it heavier than the ones you used. Not heavy in weight, but heavy with memories, with intention, with a lifetime's journey. You placed it on the table, beside the white fabric, and saw that the two images were not contradictory. One represented a beginning, the other an offering, but both were sown with patience. You completed the robe no one would wear. When you folded it, you felt no pride nor fatigue, only a lightness, as if the robe just sewn was not only an offering for the altar, but also a way for you to shed a thick layer within your own mind. You and he carried the robe into the main hall. No grand ceremony, no bells, no chanting, just two people, one robe, one altar. You placed the robe on the lotus pedestal at the feet of the black bronze Buddha statue. Your hands trembled slightly, not from nervousness, but from emotion. You joined your palms, bowed your head, then sat silently with the old tailor for a long time. No one told the other, but both knew in that silence a transmission had taken place. Not through doctrine, not through a certificate, but through a needle and a sincere heart. And when you stood up, you were no longer the student. You had become the keeper of the thread. When you returned to your room, you didn't go back as usual. You walked slowly towards the back of the Zen garden, where there was a small bamboo hermitage that few visited, and this garden didn't have many plants, just rocks, white sand, a few ancient bonsai, and a skinny pine tree leaning southward as if bowing to the earth. You sat down on the hermitage steps, your back against the bamboo wall, listening to the gentle wind rustling through the thatched roof, like someone's hand softly arranging your thoughts. Nothing left to do, nothing left to complete, and you realized nothing left to mend either. How long had you been living in the monastery you couldn't remember clearly? The chanting sessions, the simple meals, the silent hours, sweeping leaves, the nights sewing robes under the moon, all blended into a stream of memory without timestamps. But you knew you had left your old life long ago, not with your feet, but with your mind. Oh, you suddenly thought of the old tailor. How many years had he lived in that small room, silent, meticulous, without fame, without credentials, unpraised by anyone, yet he sat there, night after night, mending old robes, as if mending tattered souls that no one knew about. You had seen famous monks give Dharma talks, leading thousands, but you had never seen anyone teach the way with a needle and thread like him. And now, remembering his wrinkled face, you no longer saw a tailor. You saw a master, a Zen teacher hidden beneath a worn brown robe. In Zen, there is a tradition called entering the way through worldly affairs, using everyday matters to embark on the path of enlightenment. No need to meditate under a Bodhi tree, no need to chant thousands of sutras, just do one thing to the utmost of mindfulness. And the old tailor was the living embodiment of that spirit. The moon was full again. Light shone down on the white sand in the Zen garden, painting gentle shadows like a robe billowing in the wind. You stood up, brushed the dust off your robe, then returned to the sewing room. When you pushed the door open, the tailor was sitting there as usual, but something had changed, not in him, but in you. You no longer saw him as an instructor, you saw him as a mirror, not reflecting appearance, but reflecting the inner self. You sat down beside him, asking nothing. He gestured towards a small wooden box in the corner of the room. You went to open it. Inside were fabric scraps he had saved over many years, pieces from robes of monks who had passed away, a piece from the first robe he sewed for himself as a novice, even threads faded by moonlight and sweat. You picked up each piece silently. He spoke, his voice very slow. I keep these things not because I'm sentimental, but because they remind me of one thing: everything was once loved. You looked at him. He continued. Even a small discarded piece of fabric, if it was once held with presence, is not meaningless. People are the same. Sometimes we think a period of life was a mistake, a waste. But if you look back with a clear mind, you'll see that period helped you become who you are now. You bowed your head, your hands resting on the flap of the robe you were wearing. You thought about the old year's mistakes, wrong choices, hurts you had tried to forget, and now you didn't want to forget anymore. You wanted to keep them, not to torment yourself, but to be grateful. He handed you a red thread, bright as blood. Then he pointed to the very robe you were wearing. You will sew another line onto your own robe, not to mend, not for beauty, just to remember you have walked through. You took the thread, threaded the needle, and began to sew onto the left sleeve cuff, each stitch like a whisper. I have hurt, I have been foolish, I have been lost, but I did not give up. By the time you finished sewing, he had poured tea. He pushed the cup towards you, then raised his own, looking at you, smiling like a father looking at his grown child. You smiled back, your heart as light as silk, as bright as the red thread just sewn. The two of them drank tea under the oil lamp. No one said a word, but you knew between them there was nothing left to hide. Only presence remained. As you stepped out of the sewing room, the air seemed clearer than usual. The sky wasn't too sunny nor overcast. Clouds drifted lazily like unformed thoughts. A gentle breeze was just enough to stir a few stray hairs on your forehead, like a reminder that you were still in the midst of life, but your mind was no longer swept away. You passed by the main hall. On the steps, the abbot was meditating, his small figure as steady as an old pine tree on a mountain. He didn't open his eyes, but you sensed he knew you had just passed by, knew even the path you were silently walking within yourself. You paused, joined your palms in a deep bow, then continued on. The old tailor was not in the room. On the sewing table was a square-wrapped cloth bundle, tied with red thread, the kind you had just used to sew onto your own robe. Beside it was a small handwritten note. Just one line, carry it, but don't open it yet. You picked up the cloth bundle, as light as holding a secret. No further instructions, no admonitions, but as always, you knew what to do, or rather, knew that you no longer needed to know. Some things don't need an explanation. They just need to be carried as a natural part of the journey. You took the bundle to the stream where you had once slept under the moon and stars, where you had seen the tailor sewing the sky with needle and thread in your dream. You placed the bundle on the flat rock, then sat down opposite it, not opening it, not curious, just silently listening, not to the stream, but to the sound of your own heart. You suddenly remembered all the stories that had passed since your first day in the monastery. The silver needle found under the altar, the moonlight on the tailor's back, the scorched fabric, the white thread of non-attachment, the patchwork of memories, the red thread of gratitude. All were present at once, in no particular order, yet not chaotic. They formed layers like a cloak of wind, one layer nestled within another, embracing you, keeping your mind still amidst all emotion. You gently stroked the cloth bundle. Beneath the thin fabric, you felt the shape inside, not something hard, perhaps a robe, perhaps old threads, or perhaps emptiness. You smiled faintly, and for the first time, you didn't feel the need to know, accepting not knowing, not controlling, not defining. That was the deepest freedom you had ever experienced. In Zen Teachings, there is a famous example. A person comes to ask a Zen master, "What is the way?" The master replies, "When hungry, eat. When tired, sleep. Not miraculous, not mysterious. The way is simple, yet complete. Living." You stood up, holding the bundle. Your heart suddenly softened, like a thread that had been pulled taut and then released. Nothing left to prove, nothing left to complete. When you returned to the sewing room, the tailor had come back. He was sewing a hem on an old robe, perhaps belonging to someone who had just left or just arrived. You placed the bundle on the table, No words needed. He glanced at it, nodded slightly, didn't ask if you had opened it, didn't say what it was, just a confirmation that the path had begun to open beneath your feet and you were steady enough to walk it on your own. Then he said, without looking at you, you should stay in the room. You were surprised but didn't ask why. After a simple meal, you returned to your room. The window was ajar, the moon hadn't risen, only the dim light from the oil lamp on the table. You sat down. A moment later, there was a very light knock on the door. When you opened it, it was the old tailor. He entered holding a long piece of fabric, ash gray, with a white threaded border, the kind used only on sacred occasions. He placed the fabric on the table, then silently unfolded it. Upon it was a complete robe, but one no one had ever worn. You looked closely, the style familiar, the stitches familiar, even the scent of the fabric was familiar. You were speechless. This was the robe he had been sewing for many months, but you had never seen him finish it. Now it appeared like a wordless sutra. He pushed the robe towards you. Yosh, try it on. You hesitated, but then complied. As you put it on, you found it fit your body strangely well, as if that robe had been sewn from the very fabric of your memories, as if each needle had passed through what you had loved, lost, forgiven, understood. He looked at you, not smiling, not nodding, just stood up and bowed deeply, and for the first time, he bowed to you. And you, not knowing why tears fell, not from emotion, not from sadness, but because you had just seen something deeper than anything ever spoken. Each person is a robe, and life is a tailor. You just need to sit still and let each stitch of the present connect you to your own original face. When you awoke, the ash-gray robe still hung neatly in the corner of the room, folded carefully like an unspoken prayer. You didn't wear it anymore. You didn't need to. It had become a part of you not to be worn, but to be lived. You stepped outside. Sunlight bathed the monastery roof in a soft yellow, as if the sky were opening its heart. On the stone path leading to the back garden, tea leaves fell silently. Without wind, without sound, everything seemed to hold its breath, yet remained vibrant. You went to the sewing room, opened the door gently as usual, and saw the old tailor sitting there. But something was different. Before him was an unfinished painting, a thick sheet of yuan paper, used for calligraphy and painting, already bore the faint outline of a plum blossom branch. No color, no words, just a few dry brushstrokes, as if testing his hand. You entered, sat down beside him. No questions, no words, simply sharing the space. After a while, he spoke. The plum blossom has not yet bloomed, but spring is already here. You were slightly surprised, not by the words, but by his voice, which was very different, no longer hoarse like incense smoke, no longer murky like mist, but clear, light, like a bamboo flute. You remained silent, and he continued. Human life is like that too. Sometimes you don't need to see the result. Just sew a needle into someone's heart, then withdraw your hand. Whether it blooms or not does not belong to you. You looked at him, saw a gentle light in his eyes. Then he pointed to a small piece of fabric beside him. I want you to sew me a pouch. You flinched slightly. A pouch to hold what, he replied. A pouch to hold what needs no keeping. His answer made you pause. How to hold what needs no keeping. But then you understood not to hold object, but to hold the mind. You took the fabric, threaded the needle, began to cut. Your hand no longer trembled as before. Each stitch was even, not too tight, not too loose. Every movement of yours was no longer a manual task. It was a meditative practice. In Buddhism, there is the concept of moment-to-moment unceasing mindfulness, meaning every moment can become Zen contemplation, If you place your full attention and compassion into it, you were living in each of those moments. The pouch you finished sewing was simple rectangular, a flap closure, a wooden button, no pattern, no name. But when you handed it back to him, he received it with both hands, as carefully as if holding a gem. He placed the pouch in his lap, then said softly, "I will use it to keep forgetting." You were slightly taken aback. He continued, "I have remembered too many things in my life. Who said what? Who did what? Who left? Who returned? It all remains here." He pointed to his head. "Now I want to forget, but not forget, as in losing, but as in letting go." You understood. Some memories don't need to be erased. They just need to be stored away in a soft place, no longer sharp, a place where if someone accidentally opened it, they would only find a gentle fragrance, not an old rusty blade. He didn't sew. You didn't either. The two of you sat on the veranda. A light breeze blew, making the window shutter open and close like a breath. You looked at him, wondering how many years had he sat there, how many robes had passed through these hands, how many pieces of fabric were once part of someone else. And now, was he about to leave? You didn't dare ask, but he knew. He said softly, "No one stays in one room forever. Even this sewing room is just a temporary dwelling." You asked quietly, "Where will you go, Master?" He smiled, "To a place where needles and thread are not needed." You wanted to keep him there, but you knew to hold on is not to understand, to let go is to love. He packed his belongings neatly, not much, a blue robe, a spool of white thread, the old scissors, and the pouch you had just sewn. You walked him out of the monastery, all the way to the bamboo gate. The moon rose, as full as the first night you met him. He turned to look at you, then smiled, as light as a wisp of smoke. "Remember to sew carefully, but don't pull the thread too tight." You smiled, nodded, and stood there watching until his figure disappeared behind the pine ridge. You didn't cry, but you felt a certain needle had just passed through your heart, not to sew it shut, but to open it, to open a vast space where you would continue to sew no longer under his guidance, but in every breath, every threading of the needle, every gentle push into the fabric, you would always hear him whispering somewhere very near. Just be present. That is enough. You returned to the sewing room, for the first time, truly alone. No more gentle, dry coughs when the weather changed. No more thin back hunched over the old wooden table. No more warm cup of tea placed silently in the corner. Everything was still there, but the atmosphere was different. It was quieter, deeper, and also more profound. You sat down, opened the small drawer where he used to keep his sewing tools. Everything was neatly arranged, needles stuck in rows, thread spooled in the right direction, fabric folded evenly to the inch. You touched the spools of thread in various colors: tea green, earthy brown, pale yellow, milky white, ash gray, like touching a silent life he had dedicated. At the bottom of the drawer, you found a thin piece of paper folded in four, yellowed with time. You unfolded it, neat handwriting appearing, the ink faded. "Who sews robes does not sew people. Who mends tears does not mend hearts. If one knows how to sew with silence, one will see the Dharma body in every stitch." You read it over and over, countless times. Each time, the sentence led you further down a path in your mind. You sat still, holding the paper, your heart echoing his deep, warm voice like a distant ancient bell. "We don't sew to have a robe, but to listen to what we are putting into each thread." You looked at the unfinished robes he had left behind, some only sketched, some just cut, one nearly finished but without a collar. You began to select an old indigo-colored robe, silently continuing where he had stopped. No thinking, no correcting, just continuing. You understood that continuation is not imitation, not doing the same but preserving the spirit while allowing yourself to be present in your own way. In Zen, there is a spirit called transmitting the mind seal not through words, not through texts, but through profound understanding between mind and mind. You had no Dharma name. No one officially transmitted robe and bowl to you, but you knew in the moment you picked up that needle, you had received a continuation. A young novice came to the door. He handed you a robe torn at the shoulder, asking you to mend it in time for the upcoming retreat. You took the robe, smiled, and gently gestured to the seat beside you. He hesitated for a moment, then sat down, said nothing. Not in a hurry either, Nam. You handed him a spool of thread, then took out a needle. The two of you began to sew not as teacher and student, not as instruction, but as doing together. For the first time, you saw yourself in the posture of the tailor from years ago, no lectures, just guidance through silence. He fumbled, his hands stiff, thread tangled, needle askew. You didn't correct him, nor take his hand. You allowed that clumsiness to be fully present, like a young plant first finding its way towards the sun. After a while, he looked at you, his eyes somewhat ashamed. You just smiled. The thread tangles because the mind is trying. It's okay. Every wrong stitch is a lesson in being gentler. He nodded, then continued sewing. The next stitch was slower, but surer. You led him toward the stream where you had once sat, slept, and realized many things no one taught. The two of you sat down, and you told him about the fabric scraps the old tailor had kept, about the pouch for things not needing to be kept, and about making a robe not meant to be worn. He was silent, then exhaled very slowly. I thought sewing robes was a small task. I didn't realize it was a Dharma gate. You nodded, and also a mirror. He asked what kind of mirror. You replied, a mirror to see yourself. When you pull the thread too hard, it breaks. When you push the needle hastily, the fabric tears. When you think about finishing quickly, your hand will tremble. All are expressions of a restless mind. He bowed his head, as if he had just understood something more profound than any lecture in Buddhist classes. On the way back, he said, in the future, I also want to sew robes like you, Master. You replied softly, no need to sew alike, just sew with your own silence. You opened the cupboard, took out the spools of thread the old tailor had used, red, white, blue, and placed them on the table. Then you sat down, refolding each fabric scrap he had left, not to sew robes, but to remember. Remembering that a path of practice doesn't necessarily pass through the sound of gongs, bells, or sermons. Sometimes it passes through an old needle and someone who knows how to listen to silence. Autumn arrived like a fleeting fragrance, without noise, without announcement. On the monastery roof, yellow leaves began to fall sporadically, drifting down as gently as the slow, golden dust of heaven and earth. The air grew cool, just enough to make you tuck your hands into your sleeves when you went out to the courtyard, just enough to make the morning tea a little richer. The sewing room remained unchanged. Everything was in its old place, the box of needles and thread, the wooden table, the low stool, the stacked pieces of fabric. But since the old tailor left, that space had become a kind of private meditation hall, a place with no chanting bells, no incense smoke, only the sound of thread-piercing fabric, like the silent sutra chanting of hands. Each day, a few people would visit a young novice needing a patch on a robe clawed by a cat, a nun needing sleeves adjusted, an elderly laywoman entrusting you with her late husband's ceremonial robe, wanting to keep it as a memento. You never refused, but you never rushed either. Each person came with a story, and you listened to that story before you began to sew, not out of curiosity, but to understand what burdens the fabric carried. An old man from a nearby village brought a traditional round-collared, wide-sleeved robe, typical of the northern mountain regions. He didn't say much, only that this robe belonged to his deceased wife, and that he wanted you to preserve the collar, the part she used to tuck around him when he felt cold. You took the robe, your hand lifting the collar fabric, now soft as silk from years of use, and felt your heart grow still. You offered no words of comfort, only invited him to sit, poured a cup of hot tea, and began to embroider a new border stitch. Your hand moved slowly, each needle thrust seeming to listen to the rhythm of his breath, not the breath of his lung, but the breath of an old heart, remembering an old love. You didn't think you were sewing a robe. You were sewing time. When you handed the robe back, he didn't examine it closely, just took it, gently stroking the newly bordered collar. His eyes welled up, but no tears fell. He bowed deeply and left in silence. You watched him disappear behind the row of camellia trees, then turned back into the room. On the table, the old tailor's scissors still lay in their place. You picked them up, gently wiped the blades with a soft cloth, and then, instinctively, you saw your own faint reflection in the blades, not clear, not sharp, but very real. You remembered a passage from the Lankavatara Sutra: all sentient beings possess Buddha nature, but due to deluded thoughts, they fail to see it. You exhaled slowly. You had once sought a teacher, had once hoped for a model, a golden standard. But now you understood the most profound teaching comes not from words or forms, but from the vibrant aliveness in every ordinary moment. You didn't need to search for anyone anymore. Just sit down, hold the needle, thread it, and sew with complete presence. You tidied the sewing room, folded the cut fabric rolls, smoothed out the table liner, lit a small candle. You hung on the wall a piece of cloth the old tailor had left, just a piece of coarse canvas, on which he had once written, "Do not hasten to end the thread. Sometimes incompleteness itself is the beginning." You looked at those words for a long time. Then you sewed a line of stitches onto your own collar, not because it was torn, but to remind yourself that practice never ends. When you think you have learned enough, that is precisely when you need to start over with the mind of a beginner. You woke very early, went down to the stream, washed your face with cold, clear water. Then you sat on the familiar large rock, spread a white cloth before you, took a deep breath, and wrote on it 3 words with blue thread: stillness, compassion, lightness. These were the 3 things you wanted to keep amidst the myriad things that had passed, been sewn, torn, and mended. Not 3 great vows, not 3 pillars of a doctrine, just 3 specks of dust you had gathered after traversing the path of needle and thread. You folded the cloth, took it back to your room, and placed it in the top drawer, not for anyone to see, not for anyone to ask, not to prove anything, just to know that amidst countless drifting lifetimes, you had once sat quietly and sewn a robe for yourself. The following days passed like water seeping into earth. No noise, no excess, no trace. You gradually became a part of that small sewing room, or perhaps the room had become a part of you. You opened the door, letting the first sunlight touch the edge of the wooden table. You washed your hands in cool well water, then brewed tea, not needing anyone to drink with, but never drinking alone. You sewed slowly under the oil lamp, listening to the gentle wind by the window, like an old friend visiting unannounced. As you were mending the collar of an elderly nun's robe, a young novice ran up to report, "There's a strange man at the monastery gate asking for the robe maker." You stood up without surprise, just folded the robe flap, set it aside, then followed him to the gate. The man was in his 50s, his clothes shabby, his hat torn, holding a dirty old bundle of cloth. He stood silently before the gate as if he had been waiting there for a long time, but his eyes showed no impatience. When he saw you, he just bowed his head, then opened the bundle. Inside was an old monk's robe, worn at the shoulders, torn at the sleeves, and stained with a large ink blot on the left chest. He said softly, "I used to be a monk, then I returned to lay life. Now I want to come back." And you didn't ask why he left, nor why he was returning now. You just reached out to take the robe, then invited him to follow you to the small room where you usually worked. On the way, he said nothing, but each of his footsteps was heavy, as if carrying a past that hadn't yet been sewn back together. Back in the room, you spread the robe on the table. Your fingers touched the ink stain, deeply soaked into the fabric. It couldn't be washed clean, nor could it be hidden. But you had no intention of erasing it. You asked him, "Do you want to keep this stain?" He nodded. To remember, you began to sew, slowly, unhurriedly, not avoiding the stain, not trying to decorate it beautifully. You just went around the ink blot with pale yellow thread like a thin halo, embracing what had passed. You knew people are not saints because they have no blemishes. People become pure when they know how to look at those very blemishes without turning away. When you finished sewing, you handed back the robe. The man took it with both hands. He didn't cry, but his eyes glistened like moonlight on pine needles. He said, "I thought I had to start over with a new robe, but now I see mending this old one was already the beginning." You nodded. Every stitch is a step back home. You sat before the oil lamp, remembering how many robes you had sewn, some for newcomers to the monastery, some for those about to leave, some for the dead, some for those who had just returned after years astray. Each robe was a story. Each thread was a cherished wound. You opened a drawer, took out a thin notebook where you used to jot down orders, fabric flaws, robe dimensions. Now you began to write again, no longer about technique, but recording what you saw from within the people who came. On the first page, you wrote the man with the ink stain once left, but still returned, kept the mark, no denial, no erasure, just a circle of golden thread and the courage to reclaim himself. You knew you weren't writing to store information. You were writing so as not to forget all mending, if done with love, is not remaking but continuing. You extinguished the lamp, stood on the veranda. The night wind wrapped around your robe. The piece of fabric hanging by the window flapped gently like a whisper. Don't expect perfection, just expect authenticity. The moon was partly obscured by clouds, but you no longer needed a full moon. A crescent moon was enough to illuminate the path of sewing each stitch. And in that silence, you joined your palms, closed your eyes, and clearly heard your own heart sewing itself back together. A light rain began to fall. Tiny droplets fell evenly on the roof tiles, creating a solemn rhythm, like a wordless chant. You opened the slightly creaking wooden door, damp from the weather, and took a deep breath. The smell of earth, wet wood, and old tea leaves fallen in the Zen garden lingered in the air, gentle yet profound. You didn't turn on the light, didn't brew tea, didn't light incense, just sat by the window, letting the rain fall and seep into time. Perhaps this was one of those moments when you needed to do nothing, and that very non-doing was part of the practice. Through the delicate raindrops, you saw a small figure ambling across the stone courtyard. It was the young novice who had once sewn a crooked seam. He approached the door, didn't enter, just stood sheltered under the eaves, murmuring, "Master, my robe is torn at the knee. I don't know if I can mend it." You nodded, didn't tell him to bring it in, didn't ask if he knew how to sew. You just pushed out a small stool beside the window. He sat down, pulled a piece of light brown fabric from his robe. The tear wasn't large, but it was right at the point of most contact. The fabric, worn from long hours of meditation, had come unstitched. You didn't hand him a needle, nor help him with thread. You just waited. After a moment, he said, "I don't know where to start." You looked at him and replied, "From where it's torn." The answer made him pause, but then he nodded. You gave him a needle and thread, not too fine, not too thick, a spool of brown thread slightly mismatched with the original fabric, but you chose it intentionally because you knew if we only use matching thread to mend all wounds, we will mistakenly believe we were never hurt, and thus we will forget the most important lesson we have once been in pain. He began to sew. His hand trembled. The needle tilted, but you didn't correct him. Just silently sipped tea, watched the rain outside, and let the sound of the rain and his young, uneven breath merge. A little later, he looked up, "Master, this stitching is so ugly." You smiled faintly. Beautiful or ugly doesn't matter as much as whether you are being sincere. Don't sew for others to see. Sew so that you yourself believe this tear deserves to be cared for. He fell silent. A moment later, he continued. When he finished, the stitches were uneven, the color slightly off, the tension inconsistent, but he looked at it strangely as if he had just mended something within himself. You took the fabric, gently touched each stitch. This tear will still be visible, but it will become a reminder that you know how to take care of yourself. He bowed his head very low, not out of shame, but out of understanding. You tidied up the thread boxes. It had been a while since you checked them. A few spools were deteriorating, others were damp. There were spools the old tailor had left, which you still hadn't used, perhaps because the time wasn't right, perhaps because they weren't meant for fabric, but for people who came when their hearts were just open enough. In a small compartment, you found a piece of paper folded in four, no words, no seal, but when you opened it, inside was a single golden thread, coiled into a perfect circle. You placed it in your palm. The faint light from the oil lamp cast upon it, making the thread shimmer like a sunbeam caught from a nameless day. You didn't use that thread to sew. You just placed it on the table and looked at it for a very long time. Then you took a piece of blue fabric and sewed a circle around the thread, not to hold it tight, but to create space for it to exist. You placed that piece of fabric on the windowsill, where the moon often shone in at night, and you suddenly understood the tailor of yore had not just taught you to sew robes, he taught you how the most precious things are not lost by not trying to hold on to them. As you were sewing the sleeve hem for a new monk, he asked, "Master, from whom did you learn to sew?" You paused, looked up at the moon, then smiled. "From someone who once taught me how to be silent, one late autumn day, when the sunlight softened and the wind carried the dry scent of old bark. You were invited to a small ceremony in the meditation hall. Not a major temple event, no flags, no drums or bells, no grand Dharma talk, just a ceremony for 3 young novices receiving their precepts, those who would officially enter monastic life with full vows. You didn't sit in the front rows. You chose a secluded corner near a wooden pillar where light filtering through the window cast dim streaks. From there, you silently watched the 3 young men sitting with clasped hands, their robes neat, their eyes still holding a youthful uncertainty, but also shining with a gentle determination. One of the 3 was the novice who had once asked you to mend the fabric at his knee, and he was wearing that very robe, the one with the crooked coarse stitches, the slightly mismatched color, yet still preserved like a mark of his journey to maturity. You couldn't help but smile. As the monks chanted the precepts, their voices were as even as gentle waves lapping the shore. You didn't chant along, you just listened. Each resonant sound was an invisible needle, tracing the spine of everyone present in the meditation hall. You saw clearly precepts are not binding ropes. Precepts are thread, and a practitioner every day is a tailor sewing the robe for their body and mind with precepts, with concentration, with wisdom. After the ceremony, as everyone gradually departed, that novice approached you, bowing deeply. Master, I kept the old stitches, because I know I learn more from them than from any teaching. You lightly touched his hand, no words were needed. You returned to the sewing room, where the autumn light spilled onto the brick floor in long streaks. You sat down at the wooden table, where the old tailor had once sat, where he had once stuck his needle into the center of the tabletop before joining his hands in meditation. You did the same. No fabric, no needle, only two clasped hands, and a vast, silent space stretching before you. You sat there, breathing softly, and realized something profound all these months. You hadn't just learned to sew robes, but also how to stay with yourself. In Zen, there is the concept of seeing illusion is to be free from it. That is, to see deluded thoughts is already to be detached from them. You don't need to chase them away. You don't need to fix them. Just see. And every stitch you had made, every tear you had touched, had taught you how to look without judgment. When the wind grew stronger, you reorganized the fabric cabinet. In the corner, you discovered an unused spool of thread, silver gray, shimmering faintly like moon dust. With it was a small piece of paper with familiar slanted handwriting. Use this thread when sewing a robe for someone whose name you do not know. You paused. A stranger visited the monastery. He didn't give his name, didn't tell his story, just asked to stay overnight. His robe was torn at the shoulder, the flap unstitched. But he still wore it, still bowed to the Buddha, still meditated as if everything were perfect. He left the robe on the veranda of the sewing house, then departed silently. You found the robe, no note, no message, but you knew this was the time to use that silver gray thread. You began to sew, slowly, carefully. Each stitch carried the unknown, not knowing who he was, where he came from, where he was going, not knowing the story he carried, not knowing if he would return. You knew only one thing: that person had been present here, left a robe, and an opportunity for you to sew with unknowing. You finished the robe as the moon climbed high, hung it up right in the middle of the room. No name attached, no credit taken, just a small line hung on the flap, a robe for one passing through, leaving a whisper of wind. And you realize some robes are not meant to be worn. They are meant to remind you that everyone, at some point, needs mending. As you went out to the courtyard to dry fabric in the sun, a strong wind suddenly blew. It swept fiercely through the old pine trees, sending leaves flying like a small storm. The newly hung fabrics billowed violently, some pieces dislodged, a few pins falling from the line, tumbling onto the wet ground. You didn't rush, just stood watching. And then you smiled faintly, because in that strong wind, you saw that you too had once been like fabric, pulled by life, shaken by your mind, once wishing to be held fast, to avoid the storm, but in the end, learning to soften, to let go, to let the wind pass through. You picked up each piece of fabric, gently shaking off the dust without any irritation or regret for the effort. Each piece, though wrinkled, though stained with mud, still carried the breath of a process, and that made it more alive. When you returned to the sewing room, you found an envelope on the table. The envelope was made of doll paper, embossed with a bamboo branch motif. No sender's name, just a short line. The final robe. You opened it. Inside was a sketch of a robe unlike any ordinary one. It had long flaps, wide sleeves, a deep collar. The lines flowed like water, and beneath was a small note. Please let me wear this on the day of my passing. You were stunned. This was a request to sew a robe to be worn at death. You had never accepted an order to sew a robe for someone about to pass away, or at least never with such clear awareness. Your hand trembled for a moment, but only a moment. Then, very quickly, you regained your composure. You remembered the old tailor's words. Sewing a robe to wear is one thing, but sewing a robe to leave the body, that is where your hand touches impermanence. You began to prepare. There was no one there to measure. No one gave you measurements, sleeve length, collar size, but you still did it not because you knew, but because you accepted, not knowing. You took white fabric, the softest kind, stored carefully in the bottom drawer. You didn't cut it hastily. You spread it out, joined your hands silently, and sat still for a long while. Then you began, cutting each line evenly, sewing each flap gently, each stitch like a wordless sutra, each pull of the thread a farewell, but not sorrowful, only still. You didn't embroider flowers, didn't add details, just kept everything simple, clean. The stitches lay straight, the hem soft and round, the collar open as if to welcome light. The robe was complete. You folded it, placed it in a cloth box, along with a small note. This robe is not to cover the body. This robe is to send off the body. When the last breath is drawn, please wear it and go. Just know that someone once sewed it with silent hands. You placed the box on the table. No one came to pick it up, no one called back, but you knew that robe had fulfilled its purpose. The gatekeeper brought a piece of paper with news. An elderly layman who had once visited the monastery for 3 days had passed away on the night of the full moon. He wore the nameless white robe. His face was serene. No one knew where he came from. No relatives could be found. You sat down at the sewing table, took the remaining silver gray thread from the previous sewing, and tied a small knot, not for any purpose, just a way to mark. You had sent someone off, not with bells, not with rituals, but with a thread. You stood by the windowsill. The moon was full, bright as polished metal. A light wind, everything silent. In the moonlight, you saw the small sewing room become a Dharma hall. No Buddha statue, no altar. But every piece of fabric, every needle, every thread was an expression of emptiness. You sat down, lit a candle, not to see by, but to remember. The one who left was a part of you. The one who came after was also you. And you, the robe maker, were mending the torn parts in your own heart. You didn't need to say goodbye. You just needed to continue sewing. After that full moon night, the weather turned cold. The first winds of winter arrived earlier than usual, carrying the scent of decaying leaves and the raw smell of damp earth. You started wearing an extra thin underrobe when you went out to dry fabric, your hands always tucked into your sleeves to avoid the biting wind. The small sewing room remained your private world, but it seemed to be changing too, not because of the draft or old fabric, but because you were different. Your mind, through each stitch, had become softer, brighter, and also stiller. The room was no longer a place where you worked. It became a place where you lived, a place where you breathed, a place where you listened. A young novice brought in a strange piece of fabric. It was thick, stiff, a deep brown color, with a pungent smell like freshly stripped bark. He placed the fabric on the table and said, "Someone sent this from the distant mountains." They didn't write their name, just asked if you could sew a warm robe for a child. You froze. No one had ever asked you to sew a robe for a child. You stroked the surface of the fabric, then looked at the novice. "How old is the child?" He shook his head. "I don't know, but there was a small letter with it, but you opened it and the handwriting was clumsy. But the words were sincere. The boy cannot speak. He lives near the forest. When I met him, he was hugging a puppy in his torn clothes. I asked, "Aren't you cold?" He didn't answer, just hugged it tighter. I don't know who needs the robe more, him or the dog, but I thought if anyone could sew a robe that could hold both, it would probably be you, Master. You folded the paper, your hand trembling slightly. The robe to be sewn wasn't for fit, not for beauty, but to contain a love that had never known how to call its name. You took paper, began to sketch, a wider back than usual, sleeves a little longer. The front flap would cross over, like an embrace, and on the chest you sewed an extra layer of soft lining so that if anything were held inside, it would be kept warm. You sewed each stitch as if sewing a prayer, not for an adult, not for a monk, but for a child who couldn't speak and a tiny creature unnamed. When finished, you folded the robe, attached no label, embroidered no name, just sewed a small line on the inner flap. There is always room here for another heart. You wrapped the robe in linen cloth, then placed it on the veranda. Someone took it away. You didn't know who. Didn't need to know. But you believed it would reach where it needed to go. You didn't sew any more robes. You sat in the room, before a white cloth, and wrote with thread a single line: robes are not sewn to be worn. Robes are sewn to remind that this world still has someone who cares for the most fragile. The rain drizzled. You sat by the door, holding the old tailor's scissors, silently cutting leftover fabric scraps into small circles. You gathered them, put them in a thin cloth bag, not for decoration, but to offer on the altar at the end of the rain's retreat, because you believed those scraps too had once been present in a journey of love. Though they didn't become robes, they still deserved gratitude. You dreamed of a faceless child sewing a robe under the moon, small hands, but skillful. Fabric scraps fell around like camellia petals, and the child turned to you, smiling faintly. I am mending what adults have torn. You startled awake, not from fear, but from knowing that dream was not imagination. It was the next calling. You joined your palms, closed your eyes, and whispered, "As long as there is needle, as long as there is thread, I will remain seated." Winter fully arrived. The days shortened, and frost coated the wild chrysanthemums outside the veranda in white. You woke earlier, not because of the monastery bell, but because of the cold. The cold made your body more sensitive, and somehow also made your soul more prone to deepening. Every sound became distinct: the dripping of water, the distant caw of a crow, and the wind like someone gently turning the pages of a book. The small sewing room was now like a spacious robe, a place where you lived, breathed, and your thoughts gradually quieted. You didn't need to know if anyone would come asking for sewing, because sometimes you sat there just to listen. An elderly woman entered. She wore a simple blue robe, her hair completely white, carrying a small bundle of fabric. She sat down, saying nothing immediately. Her gaze was distant, as if searching her memory for something long past. After a moment, she gently opened the bundle. Inside were 2 old sleeves, not intact. One sleeve was embroidered, the other scorched. You looked and realized these 2 sleeves were not from the same robe, not the same material, not the same color, but she brought them as if they belonged together. She spoke slowly. "My husband passed away long ago. His robe I kept, but it was later burned in a fire. The other sleeve is my son's. He left 15 years ago. Never returned." She paused for a moment, then continued. "I know. One cannot mend a person who is gone and one who has not returned. But I want a robe, even if unwearable, that can hold 2 parts of the bodies of the 2 men I loved." You didn't reply immediately. Just gently touched the 2 sleeve pieces, one rough, one soft, and nodded slightly. You began to cut fabric, not to join the two sleeves into one, but to sew a space of empty fabric between them, a space sufficient to breathe, to be silent, for someone to sit down and remember. When the robe was complete, you didn't call it a memorial robe. You just called it the robe with empty space. You handed it back to her, and she didn't cry, but her eyes became even more distant, as if she could see through the fabric, through the years, to once again see her two beloved men, one gone, one not yet home, sitting together, saying nothing, but together. She bowed her head in thanks, then left slowly. You sat back at the wooden table, the afternoon light slanted through the door, shining directly onto the tabletop where you had sewn thousands of stitches. You realized something quiet yet profound. Sewing robes is not just about mending what is torn. It is also about making present what has been lost. You remembered the words from the Vimalakirti Sutra, emptiness is where the Buddha resides. You understood it was in the gap between two unjoined pieces of fabric, in that nameless empty space, that the mind could dwell. Not to be sad, but to know that love still remained. You opened all the windows of the sewing room to let the wind in, to let the dust out, and also to let the late winter sun creep into the darkest corners, where you once kept fabric scraps, pieces deemed useless. You gathered all those scraps, sewed them into a quilt, no order, random colors, inconsistent stitches. But when you finished, you saw it was beautiful in a different way, like memories pieced together, needing no correction, only acceptance. You folded the quilt, placed it on the stool beside the table, and in that moment, you knew you had also, in part, sewn yourself whole. You didn't sew a robe, just sat under the eaves, your hand tracing the final stitch of the quilt, and breathed. Each exhale was a needle thrust. Each inhale was a thread. Thus, you were sewing an invisible robe to wear on nights when no one saw you cry. It was late winter, the frost thicker, and the sun's rays paler, as if someone had draped a thin cloth over the sun. As you stepped out of the sewing room, the monastery courtyard was covered in a white layer of frost. Each footstep left a clear imprint on the cold stone, like needle marks on taut fabric. You walked towards the meditation hall, not for a ceremony, not for a task, but simply because you wanted to sit still. Your mind was like a nearly empty spool of thread, loose, light, and so fragile that a single movement could break it. As you sat down on the low wooden stool on the meditation hall veranda, your heart held no questions, nor answers, only a complete, round stillness. A young novice passed by and saw you and paused, "Master, are you not sewing robes anymore?" You smiled faintly, replying, "I am, but I am sewing a robe no one can see." The boy tilted his head, curious, but asked no more. He bowed respectfully and continued on his way. You watched his small figure recede, and a strange feeling arose within you, as if every person who had passed through your life, every piece of fabric brought to your sewing table, every finished robe never seen again, all were connecting, forming an invisible thread, sewing your heart to everyone. In Zen, there is a saying, no reliance on words and scriptures, a special transmission outside the teachings. You understood you were not a Dharma teacher. You had no long sermon, but every stitch you had sewn over the past few years was your way of transmitting the Dharma outside the doctrine with your hands, with your breath, with wordless patience. You entered your room, looked around. The sewing room was now filled with afternoon sunlight. The remaining rolls of fabric were few, only a few colors of thread were left. You knew it wasn't because you were depleted, but because you had enough. You sat down, opened the bottom drawer where you kept the first sewing needle the old tailor had left behind. The small needle, slightly rusted at the tip, but still bright along its body, and you picked it up, placed it in your palm, then joined your hands as if making an offering. You said silently in your heart, I have sown not for human bodies, but for human hearts, not to keep warm, but to awaken, not for beauty, but to remember every tear deserves to be cared for. You took a final piece of fabric, a quiet blue like distant mountains, and began to sew a circle, not to cover, not to wear, not to use, just a circle, like a moon, like a silent bell. When the final stitch went down, you looked up. It was already dark. You lit a candle, not to see by, but to mark a journey had been sewn to completion. You stood up, went out onto the veranda. The sky was as still as if wind had never blown, clouds as motionless as if they had never drifted. And within your heart, a space opened without borders, without stitches, without name, only presence complete, profound, needing no mending. You closed your eyes, placed your hand on your chest, where you had once sown that first tear years ago. Then you whispered, the most beautiful robe is the one that no longer needs sewing. Now you find yourself sitting there, quiet in a room devoid of needles, thread, or fabric, only the small candle flame burning gently, and the sound of wind tiptoeing through the crack in the door. Your breath is longer, your mind more spacious, like a lake when the wind has ceased. Everything rests silently in its place like needles in a cushion, like fabric folded neatly in a drawer, like a heart mended after so many tears. If there is anything you have realized, perhaps it is this: we do not live to avoid tears in the fabric of our lives, but to learn how to mend them with love, without rushing, without forcing, without fearing mistakes, just with patience. And perhaps right now, in this very stillness, you too are mending yourself not with thread on, but with breath, with listening, with the need to do nothing more. Let your mind flow like the path of a needle. Let sleep come like the thread closing the final loop. Let your heart, though it once had holes, become whole, like the late season moon slowly gliding past your window. You need not think further. You need not remember. Just breathe and sleep deeply, lightly, completely. The robe you wear is not made of fabric. It is made of mindfulness, of compassion, of your return to yourself. Sleep well, robe maker of the monastery. Sleep in the very robe you have silently sewn for your own heart. Next story. Let's step together into a deep forest, where an ancient temple hides beneath a dense canopy of pines, and birds whisper teachings long forgotten by the world. In that world, even the wind seems to bow before an unspoken sanctity. You awaken not from a dream, but from a long-held, hollow fatigue. No city sounds, no alarm clock, just the breath of the forest. That breath is cool, damp, carrying the scent of pine resin, decaying earth, and the ashes of fallen seasons. You stand at the edge of an unnamed forest. The path beneath your feet, carpeted with leaves from seasons past. The morning light is but a hazy mist drifting lazily through the leaves. There are no signs, no maps, yet every cell in your being feels as if it's been here before. Something ancient, familiar, yet distant as a memory from a past life. You step in, and the feeling of crossing the threshold into another world is palpable. A world without clocks, no musts or shoulds, only the sound of your own footsteps on the carpet of leaves, the hidden chirping of birds above, and the sigh of the wind, as if it has awaited you for a long, long time. On either side, ancient pines stand, their trunks gnarled. So tall their canopy forms a private sky. These trees aren't aligned, not man-made, yet they create an invisible order, as if an unseen hand had artfully arranged them to the rhythm of the great forest's breath. You carry nothing, no suitcase, no purpose, no questions. The only thing you bring is yourself, and perhaps, for the first time in a long while, that is enough. About half an hour into your walk, a moss-covered tile roof appears, nestled against a gentle slope. It's an old wooden temple, almost hidden in the shadow of the pines. Not grand, not magnificent, just a simple structure, as if it grew from the earth, from roots, from the forest's dream. The temple gate is slightly ajar. A large bronze bell hangs silently in the courtyard. No wind, no chime, yet you almost hear its resonance in your mind, a sound not from the ears, but from the heart. You step through the gate. Each footstep sinks slightly into the soft earth covered with pine needles. The temple courtyard is strewn with white gravel, grass peeking through the cracks between stones. On a small altar sits a Buddha statue in full lotus, its face so serene that your own heart softens at a glance. No one is there, no human voices, no signs, no guest chairs, only a low wooden bench beneath an old pine and a small teapot, steam rising, as if someone poured you a cup just a moment ago. You sit down. The steam from the tea warms your hands. Holding the teacup, you suddenly feel as if you're holding your own heartbeat. Everything around you is no longer outside of you. You are part of this place as if you've dissolved into the space itself. A slight sound comes from behind. You turn, an old man, thin as a stick, with silver hair falling to his shoulders, clad in a faded brown robe. His face is not unfamiliar, not because you've met, but because his eyes an expression devoid of judgment, demand, or expectation have been in your most peaceful dreams. He says nothing, just a slight nod, as if you've arrived at the right time. Then he slowly pours tea, offering it to you with a gesture. The cup he pours is neither too full nor too empty. Every movement is like a meditation, unhurried, clear, without excess. You try to speak, but he shakes his head gently, a smile on his lips. And so your first morning at the temple begins in absolute silence, but it's not empty. It's full of presence. He leads you to the back courtyard, a small wild garden where plants grow intermingled wildflowers, weeds, moss, and ancient stones. At its center is a small pond no bigger than a sitting mat, but its surface is as smooth as a mirror. No fish, no fallen leaves, just a mirror reflecting the changing sky. He sits by the pond, motioning for you to sit beside him. No questions, no teachings, only silence. You follow, sit cross-legged. Let your breath settle in your belly, and for the first time, you hear your own voice, the sigh you never knew you'd been carrying for all these years. A small bird flies down, perching on a branch above. It doesn't sing, just looks around, then suddenly it calls out. Not a cheerful chirp, but a series of low, resonant notes, like tiny bells dissolving into the forest. The old man closes his eyes, and so do you. In the darkness behind your eyelids, you don't just hear the bird anymore, you hear the wind through the forest, the rustling of dry leaves, the faint stirrings of distant insects. But deepest of all is the sound of something within you beginning to awaken, wordless, formless, but very real. You are no longer an observer. You are part of that bird's song, an echo rising from the heart of the forest, descending from the sky, and resonating endlessly in your heart. When you open your eyes, the old man has written a line in the dirt with his fingertip, "Listen, and all will be heard." You don't ask, you don't need an explanation, because deep down, you already understand. You understand that you've never truly listened to anyone, not even yourself. But now, you're starting to learn again, not with knowledge, but with complete presence. And that was only the first lesson. You awaken while the forest mist is still thick as a white veil draped over everything. No alarm clock, no ticking, no familiar hurried rhythm, only the sharp chill of the wind brushing your skin and the scent of damp earth. decaying leaves, and old incense. A forest morning begins not with light, but with breath. The room you slept in is so minimalist, its emptiness becomes a beauty of its own. Bare wooden walls, a bamboo mat, a thin pillow, and a single small oil lamp, extinguished at some point. No clock, no electrical outlets, no glass windows. The door is just a soft brown fabric curtain, and the wind gently sways it like an opening hand. You go outside, the cold mist immediately clings to your skin, making you shiver, but not unpleasantly. In the temple courtyard, the small stones, having absorbed moisture overnight, are smooth and shiny. No human sounds, but there is sound, the forest birds beginning to sing, not all at once, not boisterously, but note by note, sound by sound, as if there's an intentional pause between each call, as if the entire forest is meditating and the birds are the echoes of consciousness. You turn your head towards the back courtyard. The old man is still there, same old pine tree, same posture, same faded brown robe, and eyes that don't look outward but seem to be listening inward. You don't need to greet him. You just walk quietly closer and sit beside him. A gesture that has become a ritual, and as always, he says nothing, but he is present. Your breath and his strangely synchronize. No effort, no constraint, just simultaneous presence. You notice, each time you inhale, the air around you seems to expand a little. Each time you exhale, the world feels lighter, as if dissolving. Breath is no longer a biological necessity, but a thread connecting you to everything living around here. Then the old man gently stands up. His hand points to a bamboo broom leaning against the wooden wall. No explanation needed. You stand, take the broom, and begin to sweep the courtyard. At first, you sweep as you always have, gathering leaves into a pile, trying not to scatter them too far, trying to make it clean, but each movement gradually slows down, not because you're intentionally meditating, but because the forest doesn't allow for haste. Each fallen leaf, each small pine branch on the stone ground is like a small memory of nature, and touching them becomes a form of connection. You remember a Buddhist teaching, doing a small task with your whole heart is also meditation. And for the first time, you understand, not with thought, but with the very hand holding the broom, with the smell of damp leaves rising from the earth, with the feeling of mist still clinging to your back, while sweeping, a gentle breeze passes, bringing a few new leaves down. You stop, look up high above. A pine branch sways slightly, a few small leaves drifting onto the courtyard like tiny letters written in wind ink. The old man has been standing behind you for some time, silently observing. He raises his hand, points to the newly fallen leaves, then points to the pile you've just gathered. No words, but you understand. Clean it, or don't. The main thing is being there. You bow your head. A small smile appears on your lips, not because it's funny, but because you feel your heart beginning to bloom like a small flower in the early mist. As the sun gradually rises through the canopy, light slants into the temple courtyard. The first rays are not harsh, but gentle like golden threads falling slowly through space. You see something very clearly. Light doesn't dispel darkness. It lives with darkness, harmoniously, like two friends sitting side by side without argument. And that is the second lesson. Not everything needs to change. Some things need to be left alone so you can learn to be with them in stillness. After sweeping, the old man invites you to sit at a small table set up near the veranda. A simple breakfast is ready: brown rice, a little sesame salt, a few slices of pickled radish, and a bowl of thin soup. Not much, but just enough. You sit down, hands clasped before your chest, and look at the food as if it's the first meal of your life. Indeed, in your old life, You ate lavish meals, but rarely remembered the taste. Now every spoonful of rice, every sip of soup is distinct like the smell of earth, like the light, like the sound of forest birds, echoing somewhere in the distance. The old man picks up a slice of radish, chews slowly, then looks at you and says his first words of the day. Eat as if there will be no next meal. But do not fear hunger. You pause, then continue eating. You don't ask. The words lie there in your mind, like a small pebble dropped into the lake of your inner self. Ripples begin to spread. When the meal ends, he stands, takes a pot of hot water, and begins to make tea. You don't help, just watch. As if observing a sacred ritual, his movements are still slow, meticulous, like an artisan brewing light. When the teacup is placed before you, he says only one thing. Drink tea with your ears. You don't understand, but you still raise the cup, take a sip, and when you close your eyes, listening to the sound of tea passing down your throat, listening to the sound of your breath after the sip, you suddenly understand in the realm of the wordless. Some lessons come not through words, but through complete experience. And so, the morning passes, not quickly, not slowly, just enough. A morning where you did nothing grand, yet felt as if you had learned a lifetime. Evening descends like a soft silk ribbon falling through the pine canopy. No spectacular sunset, no sky ablaze like a painting. Instead, a transition so gentle you don't notice it until the light fades and the birdsong changes its tune. You sit on the wooden temple steps, your hands still warm from the third cup of tea of the day, your gaze fixed on the forest before you. There, every pine tree, every fern, every moss-covered rock becomes more alive as dusk arrives. Not in a showy way, but like old masters, each maintaining its own quiet dignity. The old man silently appears behind you, his hands still tucked into his wide sleeves. He says nothing, just sits beside you, his eyes half closed. A small bird has just flown by, landing on a crossbeam of the temple roof, then flying off again. The sound of its wings brushing the air is crystal clear in the almost absolute silence. The old man nods gently towards the forest, where a small path leads deeper into an area you've never ventured. No instructions, no guidance, but you understand. It's time to go on alone. You stand up, descend the low stone steps. The path is narrow, hidden among large tree trunks. At first, you walk with a sense of searching, but after a few steps, that thought fades. You're no longer walking to arrive, but just walking. Each step becomes an immersion. The sky above gradually darkens. But the darkness here isn't frightening. It's like a light cloak draped over the world, making all your senses sharper. The smell of the forest floor, the small sounds of animals, the cool, clean wind on your skin. You stop before a large, moss-covered rock. On its surface is a small indentation as if someone had meditated here for many years, their own body leaving its mark on the stone. Unconsciously, you sit down too, and then the first sound rings out, not birds, not wind, but a bell. The bell's toll isn't as clear as those you hear in city temples. It's deeper, thicker, and has a drifting quality. The sound doesn't end, but stretches out like an acoustic thread, touching everything: tree trunks, a small stream, even your heart. You listen, and strangely, you begin to hear things that aren't sounds. You hear the slight tension in your neck and shoulders you'd never noticed. You hear a faint emotion in your chest, a dull anxiety you'd grown accustomed to, considering it part of your personality. You hear the weariness in your eyes, even though they're closed. The bell calls you back to yourself, and then it falls silent. Not stopping, just silent like when a question has been asked and needs no answer. You open your eyes, it's twilight. Between the trees ahead, a thin wisp of smoke rises. You approach and discover a small hermitage, built of stone and bamboo, so low you have to bow your head to enter. Inside, no one, just a small incense bowl emitting smoke, an old wooden Buddha statue, and a worn straw mat. You kneel, not for religion, not for formality, just because your heart suddenly wants to bow. A long while later, you step outside. Night has enveloped the forest. No electric lights, no moonlight, just a thick darkness, but not scary. The darkness here is like a gentle mother, not asking you to see, but inviting you to close your eyes to perceive. You return by the same path, your steps slower, but more certain. When you get back to the temple, the old man is still sitting there as if he never left. He looks at you and asks a single question for the day. Does the bell still resonate within you? You don't answer with words. Just clasp your hands, bow your head, and in that very moment, you know you've begun to listen differently. No longer just sounds, but every signal of life, every tiny pulse you once ignored. That evening, you meditate with the old man on the steps, not speaking, not thinking, just breathing. No need to know how long, no need to know what to do next, just being there. That alone, and that is enough. You awaken in the middle of the night, no loud noises, no wind or forest creatures, just an absolute stillness enveloping everything, making you open your eyes as if someone had gently shaken you awake. Moonlight doesn't filter through the door. The wooden room is pitch black, and you're unsure why you're awake. But instead of unease, you feel calm. You sit up. The cool air caresses your arms. No need for an extra layer. No need to find a clock. Only something very deep inside you urges go out. You step barefoot onto the temple veranda. The earth is damp, cool. Small pebbles gently massage the soles of your feet. In the sky, no stars, just a deep black, as if the sky is covering your eyes so you can look within. You don't see the old man anywhere, but you hear something. The bell. Unlike the day before, this time the bell's sound is clearer, more resonant, as if tolling from the very heart of the earth. A sound neither rushed nor loud, but deep, like the breath of an old monk who has meditated for 1,000 years. You follow the sound, step by step. You cross the courtyard, pass through the temple gate, along a path you've never seen in daylight. The path is narrow, flanked by low bamboo, tree roots digging deep into the earth. The only light comes from the sound of the bell itself. It sounds paradoxical, but in your heart, you truly feel it illuminating each step. About 5 minutes later, you reach a low-lying area. In the middle, a large bell hangs under a small wooden shelter. No one stands by the bell, no rope to pull, but the bell still rings. You approach. By now, the bell is silent, no more ringing, only the reverberation. And you realize it's not the bell's reverberation, but your own. You stand still, your hand lightly touching the cold bronze. Your skin seems to stick to the old metal surface, a sensation both familiar and chilling. As if you're touching a distant, forgotten memory. Suddenly, you remember something long ago as a child. You went to the temple with your grandmother. Once, she said, when the bell rings, wish for something good, but don't wish for yourself. You didn't understand then, but now, standing in the deep forest night, amidst darkness and sound that has dissolved into nothingness, you whisper, may people's hearts find peace. No one hears, but you don't need anyone to hear. You turn back, not by the old path. Another small trail appears before you even think, and you follow it, as if your feet have known the way all along. Returning to the temple, You find the old man sitting on the steps, looking out into the night forest. No surprise, no questions, just a very deep gaze, the gaze of one who knows that all things eventually return. You sit beside him. He doesn't ask where you've been, but he tells a story and his voice is hoarse, deep but not weak, like stones rolling in a stream. He tells of a young novice, always clumsy and awkward. One day, the master told the novice to strike the bell at midnight for a special ceremony. The boy, anxious, struck the bell too hard. The sound shattered, jarring, waking everyone. The master didn't scold him. He only said, "You do not strike the bell, you strike yourself." The novice was bewildered. He didn't understand, and the master said again, "The bell only rings true when your heart is whole. When you are still afraid, still worried, still rushed, the bell cannot sound beautiful. You are stunned because the story is no longer just a story. It's a mirror reflecting you at this very moment. You had been rushed, acted out of fear, spoken just to fill silence, lived because you had to, and now in this forest night, you for the first time see the value of a deep, soft-spoken bell. Suddenly the old man looks at you, speaks softly. The most beautiful bell is the one that rings without being struck. You nod profoundly, and something within you suddenly falls away, like a leaf that has clung to a branch for too long. The two of you sit like that until the sky begins to turn a pale blue. No one says more, nothing more is needed. The sky brightens, but you don't regret the night, because that night you saw not only darkness, but the light within yourself. That morning the sky isn't clear. No early sunbeams piercing through the leaves like before. Low clouds, a sky a gentle gray like a sheet of ash-colored silk draped over the forest roof. But you feel your heart brighter than ever. You wake earlier than usual while everything is still drowsy. Not because you were awakened, but due to a gentle urge, like the unspoken call of the forest. You wash your face with cold water from a wooden basin on the veranda. The cool water is invigorating but not startling. It's as if it gently caresses your face, reminding you today is also a day worth living. The old man is there, as every morning, but this time you don't go to the back courtyard with him. Instead, he signals for you to follow him deeper into the forest. A new path appears, just wide enough for one person, winding around tree trunks and dew-laden bushes. You follow. The sound of your footsteps on fallen leaves as soft as a whisper. No one speaks during the journey, but each step feels like a question in your heart being answered, not with words, but by the absolute presence of everything around. The path leads to a small clearing, where a very large tree stands so large you can't see its top even when you crane your neck. Its base is as wide as a small room. Roots protrude from the ground like giant arms, embracing the entire space before it. On the trunk, there's a burn mark, old but still visible. The old man places his hand on the scar, then slowly sits down, inviting you to sit beside him. You comply, your heart filled with curiosity and reverence. "This tree was once struck by lightning," he begins, his voice even as the rhythm of the wind. "The villagers used to call it the spirit tree because it didn't die." You look again at the black scar, old, cracked, but around it the tree is still green, still leafy, still vibrant as any other. "Someone once asked," he continues, "why didn't the tree fall? Why didn't it burn to a crisp? And I answered that because it didn't resist, it just received, then let go." You are silent, a gentle breeze on your shoulder, the cool earth beneath you. Then he tells you an old story. Once, there was an old Zen master who lived alone on a mountain. One day, a forest fire spread, and everyone fled in panic. He just sat quietly in his hut. When the fire reached his doorstep, people asked him why he didn't run. He just smiled. "I've been running my whole life. Now I'll just sit." The fire passed. The hut burned. But the man was unharmed. People called it a miracle, but he said, "Not a miracle. Just that the fire found nothing to burn." Hearing this, you suddenly feel a slight sting in your eyes, not from overwhelming emotion, but because a quiet truth has touched the deepest part of your heart, the part you've always avoided. For so many years, you've carried so much dry wood in your mind: expectations, anger, regrets, unformed desires, and you've turned yourself into a forest prone to catching fire. Just one wrong word, one strange look, and you were ready to ignite. But here, beside the lightning-struck tree, you learn something new. Not everything needs to be defended against. Sometimes you just need to sit still, let the fire pass, let the wind carry away what no longer needs to be held. A small bird swoops down in front of you, picks up a dry twig, and flies away. You watch it and realize even a lightning-struck tree can nurture birds. You turn to the old man. He isn't looking at you, just eyes closed, a smile on his lips. His face at that moment seems no longer human. It is wind, it is leaf, it is old age without resentment. When the two of you return, you don't feel like you've left that place. The tree, the scar, the story, they go with you in your heart. On the way back, you notice something you've never seen before. The forest isn't the same as yesterday. Though the trees are still trees, the path's still a path. Something has changed, not the forest, but you've started to see with different eyes. Eyes that can see pain and view it as an essential part of the path of practice. Eyes that don't avoid fire, but also don't call it an enemy. Eyes that finally can look back at themselves without fear. Evening descends gently like incense smoke. You're sitting on the old wooden veranda, once again returned to familiar stillness. But today, something is different. Not from the forest, not from the old man, but from yourself. You realize that since setting foot in this temple, you've never asked, "When do I leave?" previously. You live by schedules. Everything had to be clear, specific: what to do today, where to go next week, how next month would end. But here, no one gives you a timetable, no one gives you a plan, and strangely, you don't need one. While you're thinking about this, the old man appears from behind the house, holding a small wooden box. He gives it to you, light as wind gliding over water. You open it. Inside is a flat stone, on which a single character is carved with a delicate brushstroke, Wu Mu, or emptiness. You look at him. He says nothing to hold on to, nothing to reject. You nod, holding the stone in your palm. Cold. Very cold, Bob, but not heavy. He invites you to the small stream behind the temple, a place you've never been. The path leads past a few rotten tree trunks and a small bamboo grove. The stream isn't large, just wider than an arm's reach, but the water is clear as a mirror, flowing very slowly, and you can see the stream bed, where smooth pebbles lie still, as if meditating. Beside the stream is an old stone bench, its back broken, green moss covering one side. The two of you sit, no words, just listening to the sound of flowing water, a quiet but steadfast sound. You take the moose stone and place it on a flat rock by the stream. The water reflects the dim evening light onto the character, making it seem to dissolve between two worlds, part reality, part illusion. The old man asks, "What do you think of that character?" You look at the stream, then say, "Is it nothing? Is it emptiness?" He shakes his head. It is no longer fearing emptiness. When you see it, you are motionless. For a long while, your heart beats slower, as if those words just burst open a door within you, a door you thought was permanently closed. You recall times of panic when a relationship fractured, when work didn't go as expected, when no one replied to your messages. Each time you lost something, you felt you lost a part of yourself, as if you were the sum of everything you possessed. But here, by this stream, beside the old man with eyes as clear as new spring leaves, you perceive something different. Emptiness is not absence. Emptiness is being unburdened. You pick up a smooth, round pebble from the stream. You turn it in your hand, then place it on your other palm as if in a ritual. No one told you to, but it feels right. The old man says slowly, people think if they let go of everything, there'll be nothing. But in truth, when you let go of everything, that's when you begin to clearly see who you are. You don't reply, just watch the stream flow, and the water flows by without looking back, without lingering, but it is still water, not lost anywhere. It is just continuing. He stands up, lightly brushes his sleeves. You stand too, your heart lighter than when you arrived. The two of you return to the temple via the old path, but somehow your footsteps feel different, light, not because the path has fewer stones, but because your heart no longer carries nameless burdens. That night, you don't sleep in the old room. The old man invites you to sleep on the veranda and on a bamboo mat under the open sky. You lie on your back, looking up at the deep black sky. No stars, no moon, but your heart is bright. And before drifting off to sleep, you hear him say softly, like the wind, tomorrow if you leave, take Moo with you, but don't carry it like luggage, carry it like breath. You say nothing, just silently place your hand on your chest, where your heart beats, and you know you are no longer the same person. You don't know where you'll go tomorrow, but you know. From now on, you will go without needing to carry anything but yourself. You awaken to the sound of forest birds, not a festive chorus, not the bustling dawn of the city, but scattered, intermittent sounds, small notes, rising from different distances like dewdrops suspended in space. In the sky, the early light is very soft, as if the sun has just brushed a thin layer over the forest. You sit up from the bamboo mat on the veranda, feeling the night's dew still lightly coating your skin. And in a silent moment, you realize you've never felt so present. Today, the old man doesn't appear as early as usual. You don't worry, you don't call out, you just quietly step into the courtyard, your bare feet touching the cold earth. And then, without any guidance, you go to the back of the temple, where stone steps lead down into the forest on a slope you'd never noticed. The slope is gentle, the stone steps moss-covered, occasionally blocked by large rocks as if testing your patience, but this doesn't make you want to hurry. On the contrary, each step makes you slow down, not from fatigue, but because you want to feel every light touch between the sole of your foot and the ground. Reaching the bottom of the slope, you find a flat patch of forest where bamboo grows intertwined, light filtering through in thin streaks, like shafts of light playing their own music. At the center of this grove is an old well, its wall made of stone. No rope or bucket, just a wooden beam lying across it like a small bridge. You approach, look down into the well, deep water, crystal clear, and from the bottom, you see your face clearly reflected, but not the face you usually see each morning. This is a version, stiller, quieter, richer in depth, no trace of busyness, no constant questioning, just a pair of eyes looking back at themselves, expecting nothing more. You sit by the well, take a long breath, and at that moment, the old man appears, slowly as always, but there's something different in his gait today, not tired, but heavier, as if he's carrying an untold story. He sits beside you, also looking down into the well. Both are silent. Then he asks, "What do you see down there?" You reply, "I see myself." He shakes his head slowly. "No, you are seeing what you still hold on to within you." You are silent. He continues, "The well only reflects. It doesn't create images. Each time you look down and see something different, it's because you yourself have changed. You bow your head." His words are like the well water, quiet, transparent, but with the power to penetrate every old layer in your mind. And then he tells a story, not long, not complicated, but you will remember it forever. Once, there was a young monk who often looked in the mirror every day, when happy, sad, doubtful, angry. His master told him, "If you keep looking in the mirror without cleaning your room, you'll only see dust." So the young monk started wiping the mirror, but still couldn't see clearly. Finally, the master said, "You don't need to wipe the mirror, you need to wipe your eyes. You don't ask further, because you know that is the lesson of the well. The well says nothing, but it silently teaches you to see clearly all that you once avoided." And the old man stands up, takes a small old bronze mirror from his sleeve, and hands it to you. There are scratches on its surface, but you realize it's these very scratches that make the reflected light refract into many shades. Keep it, he says, to remember that everything you see reflected is a part of you, but not all of you. You take the mirror, don't wrap it, don't put it away, just gently press it to your chest, like holding a newly kindled part of the light. On the way back, he doesn't walk with you, you turn your head, see him still standing by the well, his small figure receding among the tall bamboo. You don't worry, you don't call, because you understand there are journeys you must take alone to truly hear your own footsteps through the deep forest. When you return to the temple, it's past noon. You eat alone, drink tea alone, but you don't feel lonely at all, because within you now there is an entire forest living. That afternoon, the wind is stronger than usual. Not fierce gusts, but that distinct forest wind, thicker, heavier, as if carrying breath from the towering treetops you've never reached. Each time the wind blows, a wave of leaves gently brushes against each other, creating a sound like whispers in a non-human language. You sit on the steps, holding the old bronze mirror. The wind glides over its surface, the reflected light fracturing into fine, broken rays in your eyes. Then, dissolving, you turn it gently, each angle revealing a silent layer of memory in your mind, the image of an old friend you lost touch with, a word you regretted, a path you abandoned. And then you see the old man standing on the other side of the courtyard, near the small gate leading into the forest. He holds a bundle of ashes, as if taken from the temple's wood stove. He signals for you to come closer. You approach, he hands you the ashes without a word. Then he points to the outdoor altar, a small stone table under a large pine, upon which sits only a cold incense bowl and a jar of rainwater. You walk over, following the wordless instruction. The old man follows, his steps so light that the dry leaves underfoot make no sound. When you arrive, he takes water from the jar, mixes it with the ashes, creating a pale gray liquid, not thick, not thin. Then he hands you a small cloth and nods. You understand he's inviting you to clean the altar. You begin, dipping the cloth into the ash water. You silently wipe each corner of the stone, a strange feeling, ash what seemed like remnants. An ending becomes the material for cleaning the dust of time. Each wipe removes a layer of dust, but you also feel as if you're wiping yourself clean. Every piece of regret, every bit of self-blame. You remember a Zen master saying you once read, "What has burned to ash, do not try to burn again." Let it become fertilizer. You don't know how long you clean the altar, but when you reach the last corner, your fingers feel light, as if you've just released a large stone you've carried for a long journey. You place the cloth back on the ground, neatly folded, and stand up. The old man just smiles, nods, and hands you a handful of seeds. You open your palm lotus seeds, the kind that can sleep deep in mud for 100 years, yet still live. He points to a small pot of soil near the veranda steps. Nothing more needs to be said. You bend down, begin to sow. Each seed you place with 2 fingers, gently as if it's a ritual, not planting hastily, not tamping the soil hard, just placing the seed in its spot, then covering it with soft earth. You expect nothing. You don't ask when they'll sprout, because deep inside, you understand what matters isn't when the flower blooms, but that the sower has changed. The old man sits beside you, silently. The smell of fresh earth mixed with the faint scent of ash drifts on the afternoon wind. The sky turns an ashen silver, the last rays of light scattering gently over the forest, making everything appear hazy, like a watercolor painting. He takes a small bamboo stick, draws a line in the dirt. From here is after. You look at the line, not understanding. He continues, before you is what hasn't happened. Behind you is what's done. Where are you standing? You are silent for a moment, then say, I am right at the line. He smiles. Wrong, you are that which sees both sides. A simple sentence, but it rings in your mind like a bell struck in a deep well. You feel as if you are no longer the person living in the present moment, but the awareness itself, that which sees, witnesses, encompasses. You no longer need an answer, because you know all true questions dissolve when you return to your complete presence. That afternoon, you sit long until darkness envelops the temple courtyard. No lamps, no torches, only a soul that no longer seeks light, but shines from within. That night, when all has fallen silent, you are still awake, not from restlessness, not from any worry, but from a very strange feeling you no longer need sleep as an escape. You lie there on the bamboo mat under the wooden eaves, moonlight filtering through the leaves, creating sparkling spots on the ground like a tiny galaxy. The familiar sounds of the forest continue, insects like a meditative rhythm, the wind gliding softly through the pines, leaves rustling gently like someone smiling with their eyes. You close your eyes, not to sleep, but to listen. And then in the very stillness of that night, you begin to feel the voice of your own heart, not noisy like thoughts, not clear like language, but a slow-flowing sensation like an underground stream beneath the earth, long buried by heavy layers of habit, worry, and memory. Now it seeps out bit by bit, stream by stream, merging with the beat of your heart. You see again the image of your father as he sat repairing an old motorcycle, his weathered face you had forgotten for years. You see your mother's smile as she served you rice. Gentle but always hurried, you see yourself in the mirror of your old office, sunken eyes, slumped shoulders, but still trying to smile. These images come and go, like wind through the forest. No one holds on to them, nor is there a need to push them away. You open your eyes, see the old man standing on the veranda, holding a paper lantern, the small flame within shining like the eyes of someone meditating. He says nothing, just nods, inviting you to follow. You stand up, not asking where, because you know tonight is part of the path, needing no explanation. The two of you walk into the forest, this time not towards the well, nor through the bamboo grove, but a very narrow path, just enough for one person to squeeze through, where trees grow closely packed. The wind no longer strong, but the sounds of the night strangely clear the slight creak of tree trunks as the wind presses. The small sounds of forest creatures avoiding the path, and somewhere the sound of water dripping from leaves onto stone. At the end of the path is an open clearing, no temple, no Buddha statue, just a low stone platform in the center, surrounded by small wooden stakes, each tied with a piece of cloth the length of a palm, tattered, faded, but fluttering in the night wind like prayers from a previous century. The old man lights candles placed around the stone platform. Unbidden, you kneel too, not clasping hands, not chanting, just placing your hands on your knees and sitting still. The old man says, "This is where those before you sat. They left no names, only their presence." You nod. A gentle breeze blows. The strips of cloth flutter, the rustling silk like human breath. You feel as if you're sitting in a reverse flow of time where there is no age, no history, only souls who once silently illuminated themselves. A bird calls out, unclear from where nor what kind, but the sound is quiet, deep, and profound, as if detached from the material world, then falling into one's heart like a wordless question. You hear the old man speak, very softly. When you sit truly still, you will hear the voices of all who were still before you. You don't ask him who all are, because you know it could be an ancient Zen master, a mother who once silently prayed, a child who came here and left no footprints, or it could be a part of yourself that has been waiting for you here to sit together. You don't remember how long you sat, but when the old man stands, you stand too, your heart as light as the lantern still burning in his hand. The two of you return. No need for words, no need to discuss the experience, no need to analyze. Back at the temple, the old man places the lantern before the Buddha statue. The flame is small now, but not extinguished. He says, every night is a lamp. If you let it go out on its own, it will. But if you see it small, then bend down, protect it. It will be bright enough to illuminate a lifetime. You nod, not like a student grasping a lesson, but like a friend who has just shared a secret. That night, you sleep again on the veranda. No mat, no pillow, just your back against the wooden floor, eyes towards the sky. And for the first time in many years, you dream a dream without words, only light. It's raining, not a fierce downpour, but that characteristic forest rain light, steady yet ceaselessly drizzling as if the sky is whispering words no one can quite hear. The rain blends with the mist, dissolves into the earthy vapor, and falls through the canopy like beads of time slowing down. You sit on the veranda, cradling a hot cup of tea, its steam mingling with the damp air. Each sip you take is like a deeper step into yourself. Before you, the stone courtyard has darkened with rainwater, reflecting the pale light from the gray sky. No birdsong this morning. Perhaps they're taking shelter. Or perhaps they're simply listening to the rain. You are listening too, each drop of rain touching the roof tiles, leaves, and earth creates its own rhythm. At first, you think they're disconnected sound, but gradually, you realize there's a connection within them, as if the rain is chanting an ancient sutra, not with letters, not with human voice, but with repetition, with soothing, with washing away. The old man steps out, holding an old sutra book, not to read, but just to place it before you on the tea table. He doesn't open it, just leaves it there, then sits on the bench beside you, silent, both looking out at the rainy forest. After a while, he speaks, "Rainy days are for reading what isn't in books." You tilt your head slightly, look at him, then at the book. Its cover has yellowed. The ancient Chinese characters faded with time. You gently open a page. On it are familiar verses from a sutra about emptiness, non-self. The middle way, you read each character, but not like before, not reading to understand, but reading to listen, letting each character fall into your mind like a raindrop. No analysis, no memorization, just absorption. The old man continues, people often ask which sutra is the deepest, but no one asks, is my heart quiet enough for the sutra to reveal itself? You put the book down, not because you don't want to read anymore, but because you know the rest isn't on the page. You stand up, step into the courtyard. The rain wets your hair, your shoulders, but you don't run, don't huddle. You lift your head, close your eyes, letting each drop fall directly onto your forehead, cheeks, lips. Each drop is a teaching without words. You walk into the garden, where the lotus seeds you sowed a few days ago have begun to sprout. Tender green shoots push up through the waterlogged soil. No one taught them how to grow. No one told them how to lean, but they still rise. In the rain, you bend down, touch a young sprout, smooth and soft, but hidden within is an incredibly strong life force, something you've never felt anywhere else, and you suddenly remember yourself. You too had lain down. You too had been drenched by life's unannounced storms. But you are still here, not as a victor, but as a seedling that understands falling is part of standing up. You return to the veranda. The old man has prepared a dry towel, warm water. You sit down, gently dry your hair. Your eyes meet. No smile, no nod, but a very deep recognition, as if he knows you've just experienced a lesson that cannot be taught with words. After a simple lunch, the old man leads you to the back courtyard. There, a large calligraphy brush hangs under the eaves, its bristles dry and frayed. Beside it is a large flat stone with faded ink marks. He hands you a bowl of rainwater. You understand? You dip the brush in the rainwater, then paint on the stone. No characters, no images, just spontaneous lines flowing with your hand. The water ink doesn't show clearly, it just soaks into the stone a little, then disappears. A few seconds later, the stone is dry again, as if nothing had just happened. You look at him. He asks, "What do you see?" You reply, "I painted, but left nothing behind." He nods. Then you have just learned the greatest lesson. You don't need to ask what that lesson is, because you feel it with your very breath in this moment light, even carrying nothing, leaving nothing behind. You look at the stone blank, but to you it is full of things that cannot be kept, but also cannot be lost. That afternoon, when the sky clears, you sit alone under the large pine tree, not thinking, not meditating, not practicing, just sitting still as a part of the earth and sky. And for the first time in your life, you feel you need nothing more. The next morning, the sky is clear, blue as a cloth washed clean by the night's rain, without a wisp of cloud. Water droplets still clinging to the leaves sparkle in the early sun, like thousands of tiny mirrors reflecting the universe's light onto the earth. You sit under the eaves, still holding the familiar warm teacup, but today, the tea tastes somewhat different. Not because of its aroma or heat, but because you're drinking it with pure attentiveness, not thinking about yesterday, not worrying about today, only tea touching your lips and your mind fully present with it. You hear light footsteps behind you. The old man appears, as every morning, but today he carries a long, narrow wooden box tied with a rough cloth cord, its brown color as old as the robe he wears. He places the box before you, then gestures for you to open it. Inside is an ancient painting done in light ink on aged, yellowed mulberry paper. The painting consists of only a few simple strokes, a forest path leading to a small house nestled quietly at the foot of a mountain. A pine branch leans over the roof, as if about to fall but never breaking. On the water before the house, a boat without a boatman. You sit for a long time, just looking. Then you ask who painted it. He replies, "No one knows, but they say." This painting is only brought out when someone is quiet enough to see. You ponder. Every detail in the painting seems like a part of your journey. The path recalls the first day you entered the forest, unsure where you were going. The house at the mountain's foot is the sanctuary you never sought but finally found. The leaning pine branch represents old wounds within you, not gone, but still standing firm. And the boat without a boatman. You suddenly understand the boat needs no one to row it because no one is in a hurry to get anywhere. It simply is there. You look at him, he nods. The painting isn't for admiring, it's for reflecting. Then he rolls up the scroll, places it back in the box as if it only appeared for that necessary moment. Not hung up, not kept in sight, because if it were there every day, you would forget how important it is. That afternoon, he leads you down another small path, a rugged stone trail, leading to a small bamboo storage shed beside a wild purple flower in bloom. Inside the shed are dozens of wooden boxes like the one from this morning, but each box is numbered differently. No words, no labels. You ask, "What are these?" He replies, "Everyone who comes here leaves something behind." You open the nearest box. Inside is a piece of paper, the handwriting scribbled, "I used to not know who I was, but here I didn't need to know, and that was the first time I clearly saw myself." You smile faintly, a very light smile, because you understand. Very clearly, you close the box, and then he hands you a blank piece of paper and a small calligraphy brush. No need to ask what for. You know you're being invited to write down something of your own. You don't write immediately. You sit there for a long time, looking out at the forest beyond, watching the light filter through the leaves, hearing the buzz of nearby bees, feeling the lingering taste of tea on your tongue. Then you write, "I came here with nothing, and now I leave with everything." You fold the paper, put it in an unused box. Number it 24. No one told you to, but your hand acts naturally, sign as if the action was predestined in a timeline you never knew. On the way back to the temple, the old man says nothing, but you feel something clearly. Each step now is no longer to go somewhere, but to mark that you were once here, and perhaps presence is enough. That night, you don't sleep, not because of restlessness, nor any anxiety, but because that night carries a different scent, the scent of an ending without farewell, the scent of fullness without a goodbye. You sit under the large pine tree in the back courtyard, where you first meditated with the old man. Many stars, no moon, but the sky is bright in its own way, light not pouring down, but as if emanating from the very heart of the person looking up at it. Before you is space, behind you the sleeping temple, and in your chest a peace, not because everything is okay, but because you no longer resist. The old man comes to you, not from the door, but from the darkness of the forest. His figure seems to dissolve into the night, yet is clearer than ever. He doesn't sit, just stands there looking at you with very distant eyes, as if seeing through you to the very being you'd forgotten you possessed. You look at him. For the first time, you want to ask something. "Master, were you ever afraid?" He is silent for a moment, then replies, "I used to be afraid of everything, but then I saw that what I feared never happened the way I imagined." You nod, not because you fully understand, but because you accept not needing to fully understand. He continues, fear is the shadow of what you haven't dared to step towards. Once you step, it's no longer a shadow. You hear it as if he's reading from your own soul's journal. There were so many things you let fear define, calls you didn't dare make, apologies unsaid, dreams you folded away fearing rejection, and so you lived in the image of someone who only dared to stand on the sidelines of life. But here, through each tea session, each step on the path, each bird's song at dawn, you began to live without needing to protect anything. The old man hands you a small cloth pouch. Inside is a wooden prayer bead mala, worn, each bead significantly smoothed in the middle, as if turned thousands of times by fingers that knew well of desire and liberation. You receive it, bow your head, but he stops you. He gently touches your forehead, like a wordless transmission. Then he pulls an old piece of paper from his sleeve, hands it to you, saying, "Read it when morning comes." You don't open it immediately, just hold it in your palm, like a small flame to be kindled at dawn. He turns away, no wave, no farewell. But you know tomorrow is the day you will leave this place. No one asked, there's no carriage, but like a door that has opened within you, a door leading from sanctuary to return, the next morning you awaken while the sky is still dim. No bird song, no bell, only a very quiet space, as if the entire forest is making way for a silent ritual only you know. You fold your mat, fold your clothes, wipe clean the steps where you once sat, leaving no trace, but not trying to erase traces either. Then you step off the veranda, walk down the path you first came by the trail between two rows of tall pines, where you first entered with eyes full of questions and a heart still closed. Before leaving the forest, you stop, take out the paper the old man gave you, open it, just one line, the ink slightly smudged, but clear. When you no longer need a sanctuary, everywhere becomes home. You stand still for a long time, then smile. Not because the saying is beautiful, but because it's true. And because it has lived within you for a long time, just waiting for the day to be read aloud. You put the paper in your pocket, and then turn and continue walking. Not searching, but walking because you no longer need to search for anything. As you pass the last row of trees, a gentle wind rises. You turn back. The forest is still quiet, the temple still hidden. Nothing sees you off, but you know everything there will always be present within you, and so you go. Lightly, each step like touching clouds, carrying nothing, but more complete than ever, you return to the old world, but nothing is as it was before, not because the city has changed or the people around you have disappeared. Everything is the same, streets still crowded, cars still noisy, traffic lights still blinking to the rhythm of a hurried life. But you know clearly the one who has changed is you. The first day back, you walk down a familiar street you've traversed thousands of times, but this time you see differently. The old tree at the street corner you'd never noticed now attracts you like an old friend. The park bench where you once ate lunch in silence now looks like a meditation seat amidst a crowd of people who never sit still. You enter a familiar coffee shop and the staff is the same, the yellow lighting the same. But when they ask, "What will you have today?" you just smile, "A cup of warm water, please." The server is surprised. You are surprised too, because you never thought warm water was enough. You sit at a table by the window, don't pull out your phone, don't open your laptop, just place both hands on the table, silently watching people walk by outside as if you're observing a river flow past, one you don't need to swim in, and then you realize something: you don't need to practice meditation anymore. Because life itself is meditation. The child who just ran by holding a balloon. You see in their eyes what you once carried, a nameless curiosity. The old man sitting, breathing by the utility pole. You see in his eyes the weariness you tried to hide for so many years, and even yourself, reflected in the dim glass, is a person who has begun to learn not to define themselves by what they do. That evening, you go home, open your closet, fold each item of clothing, not to tidy up, but because you feel every action, however small, can become a ritual. You hang the prayer bead mala the old man gave you beside a small altar. Don't light incense, just look. And remember, not remembering him, but remembering a part of yourself that was awakened under the canopy of the rainforest, beside a hot cup of tea, or by a quiet stream where a well reflected the human heart. You rewrite the words he gave you on a new piece of paper. When you no longer need a sanctuary, everywhere becomes home. Then you tape it beside your bathroom mirror where you'll read it each morning when you look into your own eyes. The next day, you go to the office. People greet, ask, converse as usual, but you don't react hastily. You listen to every sentence, truly listen. And for the first time, you realize people don't need you to fix them, explain to them, or impress them. They just need you to be present. And you are present in a tense meeting. When someone argues, you just breathe out, gently, not interrupting, not judging, but your gaze towards them softens a corner of the table. During lunch, instead of scrolling on your phone, you just eat each bite, each chew, as if the food is a sutra dissolving in your mouth. In the evening, you sit by the window, where a few small plants you once neglected reside. You pour yourself a glass of plain water, no tea, no flavorings, and you drink it as if drinking the essence of earth, sun, and homecoming. You don't tell anyone about your trip to the forest. Don't post photos. Don't write a public journal Embark. Because you know some things don't need to be retold to be relived. Each day thereafter, you live as if you're still at the temple in the forest, not because you miss the forest, but because the forest has come back with you. You live in the city, but no longer belong to its haste. You go to work, but no longer seek achievement. You speak, but no longer need to be heard, and you are present, and that is enough. And one evening, as you meditate on the floor of your small apartment, no lights, no meditation music, no technique, you suddenly hear a bird singing very far away, not a city bird, but the bird you heard on your first morning in the forest. Its song resonates within you like a call that no longer needs an answer, because you know it's not calling you back. It's congratulating you for carrying the forest in your heart. One weekend morning, you decide to leave the city again. Not much baggage, just a small cloth bag, a few changes of clothes, a blank notebook, and the time-worn wooden prayer beads. No plan, no itinerary. You don't know where you'll go, but you feel something very clearly. It's time to sit somewhere, not to seek anything more, but to listen to what's beginning to bloom within. You take the earliest bus, letting it carry you towards the mountains, not the old forest. You've left that place, and it has fulfilled its role in you. This time, you choose a different hilly region, still sparsely populated, still forested, but without old memories. You want to sit down and begin as if you've never learned anything, never known anything. You arrive at a small village nestled at the foot of a mountain, a place with no tourists, no lodging services. You rent a simple room in the garden of an old woman, someone long accustomed to silence and quiet people like you. Behind the room is an empty plot of land overlooking distant rolling hills, mountain peaks appearing and disappearing in the mist like unread verses of a poem. In the morning, mist covers your hands and feet as you step into the garden. In the afternoon, the crowing of roosters. The sound of a distant stream reminds you of the night bell in the forest. You spread a small mat under a young Bodhi tree in the garden. Sit there every morning, not to meditate in the old way, but to sit still like a blade of grass, like a rock, without purpose, without progress. The first few days, you still have wandering thoughts, still the idea, am I doing this right? But then you begin to see that the mind doesn't need to be empty to be called peaceful. You just need not to be swept away by it. You sit. And when the wind blows through your hair, you don't think, this is wind. You are the wind. When a butterfly lands on your knee, you don't think, me and it. You are just part of that moment. One afternoon, you decide to open your notebook and write, not to recount a journey, but to drop a few lines like someone sowing seeds in a field. Every time I sit still, a part of me no longer needs to be found. Every time I breathe, a part of me no longer needs to be healed. And every time I find myself present, I know I lack nothing. You close the notebook, nothing more needed. You start helping the old woman in the garden, weeding, planting vegetables, tidying the old kitchen, not because anyone asked, not for merit, but because your hands need to work, as your heart needs to breathe. One morning, while carrying water from the well to water the vegetables, you suddenly feel light, not because the water buckets are light, but because you are no longer carrying yourself. You realize before, wherever you went, you carried an invisible backpack filled with expectations, hurts, ideals, fears. Now, you still walk, but you walk like someone who knows how to leave footprints without burdening the earth. That afternoon, the old woman gives you a bag of seeds beans, gourds, loofahs, and says, you sow them. Then if you're not here next season, it's okay. What you plant doesn't need you to be present when it flowers. You smile because her words touch the root of everything you're living. You sow, seed by seed, gratitude by gratitude. Night falls. You sit again by the young Bodhi tree, looking up at the silent black sky, where a few stars twinkle like someone's eyes watching from very far away. You place your hand on your chest, then close your eyes, and you hear the sound of silence. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of fulfillment, an empty space full of love, needing nothing, lacking nothing, no one and everyone. You don't know how long you'll be here, but you know wherever you go, whether back to the city, whether living amidst car horns or forest bells, you will carry something deeply planted, a heart no longer seeking a place to shelter, because it itself has become home. One morning, while watering the young loofah vines on the porch, you suddenly feel something very clearly. You are living, not physical living, eating, breathing, walking, but a deep, complete life, unclouded by the desire to be someone else. You bend down, gently touch each loofah leaf, your eyes following each water droplet clinging to its veins. The droplets reflect the early morning sun like jewels resting quietly between earth and sky. Bees buzz back and forth, indifferent to who you are, unflustered, unjudging. They are just doing what they must do. And you suddenly think perhaps living like a bee is also a complete spiritual practice. You sit on the steps, your back against a wooden pillar. Before you is the simple garden. In the distance, the gently sunlit hills. A stray cat appears, as it often does, walking slowly through the garden, stopping beside you, then lying down without a second glance. No one taught you this, but you know silence is also a profound way to connect. You reach out, gently stroke its back. It doesn't flinch, just shivers slightly and continues to lie still. And you suddenly understand in that moment that trust doesn't need to be built. It just needs not to be broken. At noon, The old woman gives you a small wooden box. Inside are old letters, handwritten by people who once stayed here. Each person who came, each who left a line of sharing, not long, not ornate, just things they dared not say in the city. One person wrote, "I haven't genuinely smiled in 8 years." Another, "I came here for silence, but realized I've always been noisy in my heart." You read each letter as if reading a part of yourself from different times. Then you take a pen, write on your own piece of paper. "I used to fear drifting through life. Now I know only by drifting do I learn to be light." You put the paper in the box, close it, place it on the shelf. Lightly, like placing a stone in a river. That afternoon, the wind suddenly picks up, leaves in the garden fly everywhere, dust swirls along the paths. You quickly pull the loofah trellis into a corner, covering it with an old tarp. Rain pours down without warning. You and the old woman sit in the kitchen by a small fire, an old wood stove, flames blazing red in the sudden chill. The old woman pours you a bowl of ginger water, spicy yet warm. You take a sip, feeling your heart also warmed by something very primal, the presence of people and wind, of fire and silence. When the rain stops, the sky darkens again. You go out to the garden. Leaves are strewn everywhere. Young shoots are bent by the wind but not broken. You sit down, touch the wet earth. Your hand gets muddy, but you don't wipe it. You just keep it like that. And look up at the sky. Gray clouds drift by as quickly as breath. You remember something the old man once said, "Nothing is not impermanent, but also nothing is lost." That night, you meditate. Not on a cushion, not ritually, just sitting back against the door, facing the night hills. Darkness is no longer a place to fear, it is where you return. And in that darkness, you feel your own light. Not light to illuminate the path, but light to accept even when you can't see the path. Before sleeping, you write more in your notebook. "I no longer seek stability. I learn to live like a drop of water, soft but not weak, flowing but not lost." Then you blow out the oil lamp, pull up the blanket, close your eyes, and in the final moment before drifting to sleep, you feel a faint smile pass your lips, though no one sees, because you know tonight you sleep not because you're tired, but because you no longer need to stay awake to hold on to anything. You awaken with the sound of birdsong, not the boisterous chirping of the city, nor a call to duty, but the kind of birdsong that rouses you from a half-lived routine, from the lethargy of mornings that once passed like carbon copies of themselves. Early sunlight filters gently through the cracks in the wooden window, creating a long streak on the floor. You step out of bed, bare feet touching the cool earth. And instead of rushing to wash your face or find coffee, you stop there right on the earth to stand still. Just stand, doing nothing. And with just one deep breath, you feel as if you've been born again. You put on a robe, go out to the garden. Today, the loofah vines have begun to flower. Small, delicate yellow blossoms, like tiny bells waiting for a gentle breeze to ring. You sit by the vegetable patch, your hand touching each leaf, each young stem, as if conversing in a wordless language. Each leaf is a greeting, each flower a question, each passing breeze a silent laugh from earth and sky. The old woman comes out holding a small basket. "We'll pick greens today," she says, her voice as soft as sandalwood incense. You nod. The two of you busy yourselves in the garden. No need for conversation. She cuts the greens. You pick yellowed leaves, gathering them into the basket. Each action unfolds like a moving meditation. No sound, no tools, no guidance, only presence. Back inside, she cooks a pot of greens with ginger, a simple meal, white rice, hot soup, sesame salt, but to you, it's a sacred feast. because you're not eating to live, but living in every spoonful. She watches you eat, then smiles. You chew like someone just learning to eat. You smile too, not embarrassed, because it's true. You're relearning everything from scratch, like the sky relearns its color each morning, like the forest changes its wind each evening. After lunch, you walk outside the village. The red dirt road leads through a long bamboo grove, where the tops of the bamboo sway in the wind as if bowing to passers-by. You don't know where you're going, but your feet keep moving, as if your heart has already set the course. You reach an empty field at the foot of a hill. There, a large, round stone rests amidst low grass. You sit on the stone, the wind brushing your face like an invisible hand stroking your hair. You close your eyes, and you remember the old man's words from long ago. When you sit still long enough, you'll see you're not sitting alone. You feel it clearly. Someone is sitting with you. No body, no name, but very distinct. Perhaps it's yourself, a forgotten part of you. Perhaps it's the old man, a part of him living in every quiet space of the world. Or perhaps it's pure life, formless, boundless, sitting with you in that moment. You open your eyes. It's late afternoon. The sunlight recedes into the distance, slanting onto dry grass, creating long shadows like untold stories. You stand up, turn backs on the way. You see a child playing alone by the roadside. They're arranging small stones in a circle. You do nothing, just watch from afar. The child looks up, sees you, unafraid, incurious, just smiles and continues playing. You nod in greeting, then continue on your way. By the time you reach home, it's getting dark. You go to the kitchen, pour a cup of warm water, then go to the back courtyard. No stars tonight, but there is a moon, a full, softly glowing moon, like a bell hung in the sky that rings without being struck. You sit down, look at the moon. There isn't a single question in your heart. Nothing needs fixing, no missing pieces to find, just an evening with someone who has learned to sit down without needing a reason. And you know, that is the greatest miracle. The next morning, you wake earlier than usual. The sky is not yet bright. The air is thick with dew, as still as a deep breath of the earth and sky before a new day begins. You put on a robe, open the door quietly so as not to wake the old woman, and step into the back garden. There, the loofah vines are still drenched in dew, each yellow flower closed against the early morning chill. You stand in the garden as if in an invisible temple, where every leaf, every dewdrop, every clod of earth whispers sutras with its breath. You walk barefoot. The ground beneath your feet feels both soft and cool, as if teaching you to slow down, to listen not just to sounds, but to the very nature of silence. At the base of the young Bodhi tree, you see the old woman has been sitting there for some time. Dark woolen sweater, straight posture, hands resting lightly on her knees, her face turned towards the eastern sky. You're not surprised. Something in you always knew that the quietest people are often the earliest risers. You sit beside her, neither speaks. No one needs to guide the other. Only wordless companionship. The sun gradually rises from behind the hills. The light isn't yet golden, just a faint outline on the pale sky like the first brush stroke of a hesitant artist. But you feel your heart already brightening. She turns to you, asks, "You're leaving soon, aren't you?" You nod gently, not sad, not lingering. "I'm not leaving to get away," you say. "I'm leaving so as not to carry." She smiles, asks no more. After breakfast, you pack your things. Not much the prayer beads, the half-filled notebook, a few clothes, and the old man's handwritten letter from before. You fold everything neatly, then walk around the garden one last time, not to say goodbye, but to give thanks. You touch each small tree trunk, stroke the gourd leaves, wipe dew from the loofah flowers, whispering in your heart, "Thank you for nurturing the stillness within me." Before you leave, the old woman gives you a small cloth, inside which is a packet of tea and a few seeds. "Take these," she says. "When you have soil, sow them. When you have no soil, remember, you bow deeply, not out of politeness, but as a silent prostration to all that has given you life again, from the first drop of water in the morning to the grain of sand under your heel. You step out of the village as you once stepped out of the forest. No send-off, no ceremony, only the sound of the earth echoing beneath your feet and your heart beating steadily with each gentle breath. You walk to the bus stop. Everyone passing you is in a hurry carrying bags, eyes glued to screens, ears plugged with headphones. But you're not swept along anymore. You no longer feel like a lost person in the crowd. On the contrary, you walk among everyone, yet belong to nothing. On the bus, you choose a window seat. You don't sleep, just look outside. Fields pass by, hills pass by, small houses pass by like pieces of a story you once wrote, once lived, and are now folding away. You touch the pocket where the tea cloth and seed packet are kept. You breathe deeply. No more desire to start over. No need to become a new person. No need to forget the past. You simply live like someone who has found their place in their own breath. When the bus stops in the city, you step off as if emerging from a dream, but not disoriented, not regretful. Only a single thought within you, arriving here not to start something, but to continue living as if I never stopped. That evening, you hang the seed packet by your room window, looking out at the sparkling city lights. You don't find them noisy. They haven't changed. It's just that your mind is no longer attached to their sound. You meditate for a while, then pour yourself a glass of plain water. Before sleeping, you write more in your notebook. Every place I've been has sown a seed in my heart, not for me to keep, but so that one day they will bloom on their own. You close the notebook, blow out the light, and think silently. Tomorrow, if someone asks how I'm living, I will smile and say, like a seedling, not needing to know how tall I've grown, just needing to turn towards the light each day. The next morning, you rise very early, as if your body has learned to awaken without an alarm. The city air is still sleepy. A thin mist, like a layer of breath, covers the rooftops, and the traffic isn't yet heavy enough to break the stillness. You go out to the small balcony, holding a glass of warm water. You stand looking east. No mountains, no forest, only silent buildings, a few early motorbikes, and the first sunlight trying to pierce through the dense city walls. And yet, you still see the dawn, not because the scenery is beautiful, but because you've learned to recognize light. Even at its faintest, you take out the seed packet from the cloth the old woman gave you, placing it in your palm. You gaze at each tiny seed. No name, no striking color, just tiny seeds, seemingly useless in the city. Yet you know, within them, life is sleeping. You take a small old pot from the balcony, fill it with soil, then gently sow 3 seeds, not to create a garden, but to keep a part of the silence from the garden where you once lived. You don't expect them to sprout. You just want your hands to touch the earth again. And the very moment your hand touches that damp soil, you feel something very clearly. You are still connected to your roots, even in the middle of the city. That day, you don't leave the house, you tidy your room. But not a rush tidying to make things new, but tidying as a ritual. You rearrange each book, wipe each windowsill, change the bed sheets. And on the table, you place only one thing: The wooden prayer beads the old man once gave you, right beside a hot cup of tea. At noon, you sit down to meditate. No guidance, no clock, no app. Just you and your presence. You sit for a very long time, in stillness. Nothing happens. But also, nothing is lacking. Then you stand up, take your notebook, and write, "Nothing special today." And that is the most wonderful thing. In the afternoon, you go to the market, buy some vegetables, a few ginger roots, and a small bunch of white chrysanthemums. You don't need flowers for display. You just want to bring them home like a piece of silence. Back home, you place the flowers in an old glass bottle on the dining table. You chop vegetables, wash ginger, cook a pot of hot soup. While eating, you sit with a straight back, place your chopsticks neatly beside your bowl, and say silently in your heart, "An offering to my ancestors, to heaven and earth, to myself of today." And you eat, each bite not seeking deliciousness, not to be full, just harmony between body and mind, between hand and earth, between kitchen and life. In the evening, when the city lights up, you turn off all the lights in your room, letting only the light from outside the window filter in. A pale light, dim, but enough for you to see where everything is. You sit by the window, holding a cup of hot water, and look out. People passing, traffic, worried eyes, hurried footsteps. You were once there, once part of that aimless race. But today, you sit here in the old place with a mind that has returned. You don't need anyone to see you change. You don't need to prove you've found the truth. You just live lightly, moment by moment, before sleeping. You open your notebook and write, "Every day is a falling leaf." If I'm too busy to watch it fall, I've missed my own life. Then you close the notebook. Think no more. You blow out the candle, pull up the covers, and before drifting to sleep, you place your hand on your heart, feeling something simple yet profound. I am living, and I am here. Just that is also a miracle. The next morning, the sky's overcast. No sun, but no rain either. Just a thin layer of gray clouds, like a silent silk sheet draped over everything. You step out onto the balcony. The 3 seeds you sowed the day before still lie quietly in the damp earth. No sign yet, not a single sprout, not a hint of green. You smile. No hurry. You understand in the way of seeds. Sprouting happens not in sight, but in the silence of time. Everything has its own rhythm. You pour yourself a cup of tea. Today you brew the tea from the small packet the old woman gave you. The aroma drifts by like the scent of a distant forest. Where you once sat under a Bodhi tree, you set the teacup on the table, then stand up, open the window overlooking the street. Life is still the same. People come and go, traffic hums, horns, vendors' calls. The world hasn't changed, but you are different. You find your heart no longer reacts out of old habit. A horn doesn't irritate you. A look doesn't make you interpret. You no longer seek comfort, nor do you avoid unease. You are just there, in a state of presence, without choosing. At noon, you go to a small park near your home. Before, this place was just a space to kill time. But today, you bring a small mat, sit under an old tamarind tree. You sit still, back straight, eyes on the grass before you. Pigeons walk slowly. A baby laughs, holding its mother's hand. The wind glides gently through your hair, and suddenly you fall into a state of non-distinction. You no longer see yourself as the observer of these things. You are the baby, the pigeon, the mother, the wind, and you are also the one sitting still, doing nothing. You don't think about it, you just know. Like an understanding not born of reasoning. In the afternoon, you stop by a small bookstore. No intention to buy anything, but as your hand glides over the old wooden shelves, You pause at a book with a plain brown cover, no prominent title, every breath a world. You flip through a few pages. Inside are short, simple passages, like letters from an unnamed monastery. You buy it. Back home, you place it on the table beside the prayer beads and the vase of white chrysanthemums. Your room now resembles a small meditation hall in the heart of the city. That night, you don't turn on the lights, just light a small candle. Tea is brewed, and you open the book to read a passage. When you breathe without seeking anything, the entire universe begins to breathe with you. You close the book, no need to read more, because every line, every letter has begun to resonate within you like a deep bell. Before sleeping, you look again at the small pot, still nothing, but you feel a strange warmth in your heart, not because you hope it will grow, but because you know to care for something without needing results. That is the greatest lesson in unconditional love. You blow out the candle, pull up the covers, and lie down with an unforced smile, because tonight, for the first time in many years, you don't need a reason to feel whole. The next morning, a small thing happens. As you step onto the balcony, just lifting a hot teacup to your lips, you glance down at the earthen pot that has lain still for days, and there is a green sprout, very small, so small that if you weren't close, you'd miss it, but it's there. A young shoot, barely peeking above the soil, delicate and vibrant green, like a silent answer from heaven and earth. You don't exclaim, don't rush to tell anyone. You just stand there for a long time, looking at it as you look at yourself, a part of you that has risen from darkness. After a long time of seeming silence, you need nothing more. Just that one sprout is enough to make this morning a celebration. You pour more tea, place your hand on the windowsill, and say softly in your heart, "Thank you." Unclear who you're thanking, perhaps the earth, perhaps the old woman, perhaps yourself, perhaps all the invisible causes that came together to create this moment. You don't know how tall that plant will grow, whether it will flower, whether it will bear fruit, but you know it has lived, and in that same moment, you see very clearly that. So have you? At noon, you meditate, not for enlightenment, not for peace of mind, just to sit with yourself. You sit and let your mind flow like a river. No need to resist, no need to fix, only recognition. Every thought, every memory, every gentle emotion drifts by like leaves on the water's surface. Some beautiful, some torn, some you once despised, but now you just look at them with gentle eyes, and you understand the mind is not something to be tamed. The mind just needs to be understood. As the sun sets, you light an incense stick, not to pray, not for supplication, but just for the fragrance to remind you that every passing minute can be a ritual. You pour tea, sit by the window, watch the city lights come on. You no longer feel you're becoming someone, no longer waiting for the day of completion. You just live like someone who knows they are breathing. You take your notebook, write the final line, nothing left to pursue, nothing left to abandon. The mind like a still lake, reflecting all, retaining nothing. You close the notebook, then you clasp your hands, not to pray, but to give thanks. Thanks to the forest that once sheltered you. Thanks to the old woman and the small house. Thanks even to the past pains that once brought you to your knees. For it was these very things that opened the path, leading you back to the silent truth within yourself. That night, you sleep early. Before closing your eyes, you whisper a short phrase meant for no one but yourself. It is enough, everything is already enough, and sleep comes, light as a leaf, falling onto a lake, no sound, no echo, no expectation of what morning will bring, because this very moment is fulfillment.